I'm a 42-year-old woman with a fairly normal life. I want to make it clear, I don't mean normal in a bad way either. I've always planned for my life to be fairly average, if you will. I'm just not the kind of person that has super extravagant dreams I want to accomplish. I've always been the sort of person who is completely okay with having an office job and working an 8-to-5 workday. Sometimes I wondered why I never had the ambition to be great like other people did growing up, but I figured it must have been because my parents were also just fine with ordinary lives. This specific situation happened when I was 40 and working in an accounting office as a secretary/receptionist. It was quite boring work, but I really didn't mind. It was only some hours out of my day, and the pay was fairly decent as well. There was, however, one con to this job, and that con was a man named Gary. Gary had joined the company a few years back. I had been working there for about 5 years by this time, and I'd seen many a person come and go. I never really expected anyone to stay for very long, given the fact that the building wasn't very nice. I also knew for a fact that the assistant position he was filling in for one of the accountants did not pay well at all. I kind of felt bad for him at first, to be honest. He was very optimistic about the job and super excited, but by the time a full year had passed, he was obviously very sad and bored. I guess feeling bad for him is what made me try to befriend him in the first place, and that's something I'll regret forever. Gary was a nice and seemingly regular guy at first. We went off for lunch a couple of times a week as friends, and sometimes went for a drink after work. Now, let me tell you, Gary was extremely boring, possibly the most dry and unfunny person I've ever met. All he'd ever talk about was himself and his cats. I mean, there's only so many times you can hear a person talk about their cat's favorite toys and treats before you just want to bury your head in the sand. It was painful, but I continued my friendship with him because I knew I was the only friend he had. I would have hated to hurt his feelings at the time. After around 6 months of us being friends and spending short periods of time together outside work, I noticed Gary becoming very clingy. He would text me during my days off to ask where I was and if I'd meet him for lunch and drinks, and when I politely said no, he'd get extremely angry. It was our tradition. I couldn't mess up our tradition, and stuff like that. The other thing he really hated was whenever I mentioned my husband. He really hated that. If we were having a conversation and I ever brought it up, Gary would scoff and ask to change the subject. If he asked to get lunch with me and I told him I had plans with my husband, he'd actually tell me to cancel them with my husband so I could go with him instead. I found this extremely strange, obviously. Eventually, he just became this person who was trying his best to control me. Only, Gary was just a guy I worked with. It's not like he could tell me what to do, so I just started to ignore him. One day, however, he overheard me talking to another coworker about a barbecue I was having at my house that coming weekend that my husband and I were hosting. I had actually asked the other coworker not to mention it because I didn't want Gary to know about it. Of course, he found out though. She basically yelled across the whole office how excited she was to the barbecue and how happy she was to be invited. Well, there's that, I guess. As expected, Gary came rushing up to me with an angry look on his face. He began littering me with questions on why he wasn't invited and if I hated him now. He was talking so fast I couldn't even get a word in if I wanted to. Finally, I just ended up raising my voice and telling him to shut the fuck up. He didn't like that, but I followed the shut up with an invite to the barbecue. I kind of had to invite him at that point. I made up some dumb excuse as to why I hadn't done so, with something like, "Oh, I wanted to invite you in person." He bought it, of course, which was all that mattered. In my head, the barbecue was already ruined just by the fact I knew he'd be there. The weekend rolled around and my husband and I were setting up. It was pretty hot outside and we had a swimming pool we'd set up to utilize that day. People started to arrive and we began cooking hamburgers and hot dogs. After an hour, Gary still hadn't showed up. I was really hoping that meant he wasn't going to. There he was, though, stepping into our backyard from the side gate, wearing a Hawaiian shirt and, to everyone's shock and horror, a Speedo. I was confused and upset. I felt like walking over and telling him to leave, but I convinced myself causing a scene would have been a bigger issue, and I should just let it go for a while. After a while, our daughter came home and joined the party as well. She was 16 at the time. Most of her time during the barbecue was spent sunbathing by the pool. I began to notice Gary staring at her, which of course I found creepy. I walked up to him and asked him what he was doing, but instead of answering, he just pointed at my daughter. The words that came out of his mouth disgusted me. Who is she? Oh my God, the things I'd do to that girl. The anger I felt in that moment was so intense I could barely find the words to tell him to get out. Instead, I went over to my husband and told him what Gary said. I watched my husband storm over to him. I didn't hear what was said between them. Instead, I saw Gary storm out of our backyard and yell some expletives before closing the gate. I asked my husband what had happened, but his only response was that he'd handled it. For the next few weeks, work was normal. Beside the occasional glares I received from Gary, I didn't care though. I was just glad to have him out of my life. After work, he would always watch me walk to my car. I found this unnerving, of course, but I tried not to think about it too much. Gary had become known for being a little creep around the office, so this was normal in everyone's minds. He tried texting me multiple times to apologize, but I ignored him. I was done with our friendship, if you could even call it that. I just wanted him to leave me alone. About a month after the barbecue, my daughter started complaining to me that whenever she was in her room, she felt like someone was watching her. Every time I went in there, she had the curtains fully closed. She said it was the only way she felt safe. I felt bad for her, but we could never catch anyone looking into her window, so there wasn't much we could do, other than tell her we'd keep her safe always. One day, though, everything changed. My husband always picked up our daughter from school after soccer practice, but this day he happened to be running a little bit late. When he pulled up, he noticed a car pulled up beside her. She had already opened the door and was about to get in. My husband yelled out of the window and asked her what she was doing. Almost immediately, the car sped away, leaving our daughter standing on the curb of her school, confused. What she told my husband shook me to my core. She said after she'd gotten done with soccer practice, she went to the front of campus where she usually met my husband and waited for him to get there. He didn't think to text her at the time that he was running late, as she was waiting nonetheless. She knew he'd be there eventually. Instead, though, Gary pulled up in front of her, told her he was my friend and that he was told to go pick her up. Of course, that wasn't true at all, but she'd seen him around before and assumed he must be telling the truth. That's when she opened the door and was about to get in. After she told my husband what happened, he called the police, who managed to actually track down Gary. He was charged with attempted kidnapping, and when they searched his car, they found duct tape, rope, and zip ties, as well as over 100 pictures of her in her bedroom and at her school. They said he'd been stalking her for the past month, and this must have been thoroughly planned. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison eventually, as well as receiving a no-contact order. His 2-year sentence went by fast, and he's out now. We changed houses and had her switch schools just in case. So far, we haven't seen him around. We don't know what he had planned for her that day, but we're glad we never had to find out. This story took place maybe 10 years back, so if things sound a little bit weird at times, it's because my memory of the incident has gotten a little fuzzy over the years. I'll try my best to give the best detail possible though. At the time, I was 22 years old and had just started working reception in a marketing office. I was trying to pay my way through college, and this seemed like as good a job as any. I remember my first day very well, because everyone was so inviting and sweet. Almost everyone came up to my desk to say hi and introduce themselves. It was great actually. I thought I was going to fit in there perfectly, since everyone seemed so normal and nice. As the months went on, I made many friends as well. They were all older than me, but that didn't seem to matter much in an office setting. It was a little bit hard to relate sometimes when the older woman would talk about their kids and grandkids when I was still only in college. Even though I had a few close friends at the office, I was at least acquaintances with almost everyone else. Almost. There was one man who worked with us named Enzo. He was interesting, to say the least. Everything about him was very routine-based. He'd walk into work every morning at 8:10 on the dot. He walked the same path to his desk, organized his pens the same way every day. When he picked up the phone, he would always tap it 5 times. Let me make this clear, these are just examples. I don't remember every single routine he did, but it was always stuff like this. There were a bunch of little things, too. What I do remember noticing the most was that there were only a few particular groups of people in the office he would ever talk to. I ended up asking my friend Alex about what was going on. I can't say I was very surprised when he told me Enzo had a severe form of OCD. He told our boss about it when he'd started working. Our boss told the other employees just to be sure they could be patient with him, instead of getting upset at his quirks. Over the years since Enzo had started working there, many of the original employees had since quit, retired, or been promoted to another position outside our building. Because of this, the only people left for Enzo to talk to were the original employees, 3 of them who'd been working with him since his very first day. Since he had such a strict routine, he couldn't bring himself to introduce himself to every new employee that walked in. I guess Enzo had even told the boss about this, who understood. As long as he did his job, he didn't have to go out of his way to trouble himself. I tried to introduce myself to him a few times before learning anything about him. I just figured he was rude and ignoring me, but after hearing this, it made me rethink my stance. I felt bad for judging him without knowing anything about him. Everyone knew about Enzo and what he was dealing with mentally. We all worked hard to make a work environment that was safe for him. We tried not to get in the way of his routine, and whenever any of us needed something from him, we made sure to ask one of the people he talked to relay the information to him. It always worked out well, and it was pretty smooth for a while. That was, except for one day, when our boss had a client come into the office instead of meeting him for lunch like he usually did. This specific client was a big hassle as well. I'd met him once before. Just super annoying person, very loud and intrusive as well. He had no respect for personal space at all, which frustrated us more than anything. We'll call this man Mark. Well, Mark came in one day, and of course it was hard not to notice him. He flung open the doors and started screaming across the room for our boss to come out and greet him. I tried politely asking him to sign into the office, but he just laughed at me and started to rampage throughout it. He went over to almost everyone, asking if they were going to take good care of him. I could tell he was making everyone else just as uncomfortable as he was making me. It was only when we saw him all stomping his way over to Enzo that I really started to worry. I watched as Mark sat down on the edge of his desk and started patting Enzo's head. "Having a good day, buddy?" He was messing up his hair in the process. I could see Enzo's face turning as he did this. Mark started ruffling through the papers on Enzo's desk. This is when multiple of my coworkers got up and asked Mark to stop messing with him. Come on, if he had a problem, he could tell me himself. At that point, he began playing with Enzo's pens as well, and basically laughing in his face. I guess Enzo had had enough. He stood up and screamed in Mark's face, pushing him off the desk. And that's when things started to get a little violent. Mark was now on the ground, and we all watched in horror as the normally peaceful Enzo began kicking and punching him as hard as he could, landing brutal blows against the side of Mark's head. He got 10 good hard kicks, as well as some stomps in before someone ended up pulling him away. He didn't like that either, since he hated being touched, which led to him lashing out at everyone around. No one could get him to calm down. I guess at some point during the scuffle, someone had called the police. They ended up coming through the doors soon, and all I could do was point towards Enzo and Mark's destroyed body laying on the ground as he took short, shaky breaths. They arrested him for assault, and the paramedics came and sorted out Mark. He went to the hospital. We were informed he had a severe concussion. A couple of his ribs had been broken, and Enzo had even punctured his lung. He ended up suing, but the trial didn't go anywhere once the footage of the incident and context of Enzo's mental illness was brought to light. Unfortunately, Enzo was fired, and although I had this feeling he would have quit anyways, we all felt bad for him. If Mark had just left him alone, he could have kept the job he had gotten used to for so many years and been a peaceful, kind man the entire time. The 3 employees he talked to did end up keeping in touch with him. I was happy to hear he'd got another job that didn't mind his routine-based lifestyle either. I quit about 4 years back, but to this day I still think about Enzo often and wonder what he's up to. I hope Mark learned his lesson as well, and that everyone reading this can take away the fact that you really shouldn't intentionally mess with anyone. They might be the calmest person ever, but you never know what they're going through, and what you're doing can have a bigger impact than you ever think it might. I'm 32, and at the time of this story, I worked in a fairly busy office setting. I won't bore you with the details of my job, but I will tell you it's incredibly average, and not at all what I envisioned for myself when I used to think about what I'd be doing in my adult life. Everyone always told me college was the answer to getting a good-paying job doing something I loved, but after I graduated, I was $100,000 in debt and couldn't find a job in the field I'd gone to school for. I guess I just had to settle. And let me tell you, I was not happy about it at all. I felt lied to, like everyone who told me college would lead to this amazing life had just played a huge prank on me that cost me years of my life and thousands of dollars. I was angry. My work consists of a lot of paperwork and phone calls, and it makes everything super boring. Not just boring, but also sad. Sad at how my life has led me here. I get that some people who strive for these jobs are perfectly happy in them, but I'm just not, and I'm sure that comes across in my attitude every day. I actually know it must, because most of my coworkers don't like me for whatever reason. My boss actually told me once that he would have fired me just because of my attitude and what he called a lack of consideration for my colleagues if I wasn't so darn good at my job. Of course, I hated it so much that if he did fire me, I really wouldn't care. I'd just find another job somewhere else, probably still doing something I hated. I will say, though, that I do realize now it wasn't right for me to take out my own internal anger on my coworkers. I should have realized that at the time, but I kind of liked that they all avoided me. I was a total introvert, and socializing is not my strong suit anyways. So if my attitude kept them at bay, that was just fine with me. My only issue was I wasn't just inconsiderate, but also plain rude at the time. I knew everyone called me the office bully, but a part of me found that amusing. I thought it meant that everyone hated me. Thinking back on it now, I guess it was because I was legitimately mean. I had issues building up inside me, and I guess subconsciously I wanted to bring everyone else down with me, just as a bully does. I hate even admitting that right now, but I have to be real, and what I say next is the reason for what happened to me. I sometimes made fun of people at work, not just under my breath or behind their backs, but to their faces as well. I laughed and joked about how people looked and what they ate or what clothes they wore. If someone was having a hard time at work, I thought it was funny to call them stupid, stuff like that. I know it was wrong, but at the time, I just wanted people to feel the torment I felt in my own mind and body. People used to tell me I was hurting their feelings and I should realize the consequences of my actions, but I usually just laughed off their concerns. I spent a lot of time in HR, but I guess I must have been an asset to the company because I was always just warned and never got in trouble. This specific day, I was in the break room eating lunch when one of my coworkers walked in. The second she saw me, she rolled her eyes and went to the fridge. I'm changing her name for the sake of the story, so we'll call her Angela. Angela was a heavy-set woman, and I guess that day that's what I decided to make fun of. She'd brought a leftover pizza for lunch and was heating it up when I made some awful comment that was something like, "Do you really need to be eating that?" I laughed about it in the moment, but now I just feel cringe and disgust after thinking about it. The look on her face is something I'll always remember. Everyone in the room went silent as tears began to stream down her face and she ran out of the room. Everyone else looked at me with such anger and disappointment that I didn't know what to do other than get up and walk out and back to my desk. That moment was almost like an epiphany for me. I actually started to see that the way I was treating people was wrong. I wanted to go over and apologize, but I knew it wasn't the right time. She was surrounded by a group of people trying to console her. All I wanted to do was shrivel up into nothingness for what I'd done to a woman who had never been rude to me or anyone in her whole life. The next day, I came into the office and put my lunch in the fridge as I usually do. As the morning went on, no one would talk to me or even look at me. It was like I was being shunned, but I knew I deserved it. The guilt I felt was intense, and I wanted nothing more than to take back all the awful things I'd said. But there was no fixing these relationships. These people knew me as the office bully, and that's exactly what I was. Around 11 a.m. that morning, I decided I really needed to apologize. I made my way over to her desk and began to apologize, but she wouldn't even look at me, which made me feel even worse. I went back to the break room and went to retrieve my lunch. I decided to eat at my desk to avoid everyone else, who didn't even bother to hide their mean stares. I opened the Tupperware and began eating my pasta, but something seemed a bit off. It was crunchy. I knew I hadn't put anything crunchy in there. That's when I looked down, horrified at what was in my container and what I'd just eaten. Peanuts. I'm deathly allergic. If I don't have my EpiPen within minutes, I will die, literally life or death. I felt the tingle in my tongue, and my heart began to race. I rushed into my desk drawer, only to find my EpiPen was no longer there. And that's when I went to full-blown panic mode. I only had a couple of minutes before I wouldn't be able to breathe. I knew the office kept an emergency first aid kit on hand, and the office was required to keep an EpiPen on hand at all times. I ran into my boss's office in the most hoarse voice imaginable, throat already closing as I tried to tell him what was happening. Everything seemed to be in slow motion at this point. My tongue had already begun to swell, and breathing was a struggle. Everyone was staring in horror. Everyone except for Angela. Even in that moment where I was fearing for my life, I noticed she was the only person still working. My boss found the EpiPen hidden away shortly after I burst into his office. I administered it to myself straight in my thigh. An ambulance was called and I was taken to the hospital for further evaluation. After telling my boss what happened, we both suspected someone had intentionally put peanuts in my lunch in order to force me to have an allergic reaction. Only we couldn't exactly pinpoint who, since everyone at the office hated me so much and no one would fess up. Eventually, because there was no progress, the case was closed. No one ever admitted to it, but I gotta say my gut tells me to this day it was Angela. She never cared about what happened to me after, and was the only one never to bother to ask me what happened either. I got laid off a couple of weeks after, with them now using examples of my poor behavior to finally get rid of me. I ended up getting another desk job in the same kind of work, but now I do my best to treat people with kindness and sincerity. I realized it took me way too long to understand that everyone deserves kindness. There's enough negativity in the world already. If any of you are out there, though, be careful who you treat poorly, especially if they have access to what goes into your body. You never know what could push them over the edge into harming you. Okay, so I guess I'll just try to get straight to the point when telling you about the most terrifying day of my life. I work in a bookstore, and not the cozy, cutesy, small-town vibes kind either. Though God do I wish I did. No, I work in one of those obnoxiously huge, forces small bookstores to close bookstores. Knowing small businesses in the town I grew up in are forced to close their doors for good because of the company I work for setting up shop in town isn't the best feeling in the world, not even close. In fact, it makes me quite sad at times, especially when my mom comes complaining to me that all her friends complain to her about what I'm doing to the community. She's always asking me to quit, or at the very least give back to the community she says I'm stealing from. Funny thing is, I don't run the store. I don't run the company either. I just work in the offices connected to the bookstore and manage mid-level marketing for the company locally and in the surrounding areas. I should also say I still work for the same company, even after what happened. It wasn't really their fault after all. Alright, so there was this random Thursday afternoon in October. My favorite month to work, by the way. There was an incredible view of Main Street from my desk on the 3rd floor. The city had gone all out with decorations for Halloween. On every street sign and the lamppost, there were fake spider webs and fall-colored leaves clinging on and swinging in the wind. The trees were all changing color, and I couldn't help but stare at the world outside my office. The world I wish I spent more time in, instead of stuck behind a desk. This day, however, when I found myself looking out the window, I saw something I really wished I had not. The bank across the street was a local one. Not one of those big branch banks scattered around every city in the country. It was always very quiet, and my mom actually worked there. She liked to wave at me through the front window every day at noon exactly, while she was having her lunch. I always found it a very sweet gesture. Only this day at noon, when I'd gone to the window to give my mom a little wave and a smile, she wasn't there. Actually, no one was. Usually there'd be people walking in and out of the bank at this time of day, but there was no one there, and that's when I saw him. A man in a mask, holding a gun at his side, peering out the window as though he was looking for someone. That's when panic mode set in. I rushed to the phone on my desk and dialed 911 while trying to keep my eyes on the man inside that building, with my mom and who knows how many other people inside. My heart was racing so fast I could barely speak. When the dispatcher answered, it felt like it took everything in me to force the words out, to describe what was happening before my eyes. She started to ask me a bunch of questions I couldn't possibly have the answer to, considering the only thing I could see was just barely inside the front doors. I made sure to inform them as much as I could, though. The man inside was armed and I had no idea if he had any partners. I guess that's all they needed from me, though, since they insisted I didn't need to stay on the phone with them. In my haste to explain the situation, though, I hadn't realized the masked man was no longer looking out the window down the street anymore. Now he was facing directly toward me. I slammed the phone onto the receiver and closed the blinds as fast as I could. I couldn't help myself, though. I had to take a peek and see if he was still looking toward my window. I slid my fingers through the cracks in the blinds and bent them down slightly. It was just small enough a gap to peer through, and to my relief and somewhat surprise, it didn't seem he was looking toward me anymore. Actually, I couldn't see him at all. He wasn't standing at the front of the bank anymore. I felt this sense of relief fill me for just a second, and then fear came creeping in again. I realized not being able to see him meant I didn't know what he was doing anymore, and not knowing was the worst. He could be in there hurting someone, and there would be nothing I could do. In that moment of panic, not knowing if my mother was okay, my phone started ringing. It was her. I picked up the phone and answered immediately, asking if she was okay. She was crying and scared. She said she was okay, and so was everyone else, and that's when she told me something that gave me the chills. She said something had spooked the man real bad. He'd walked right out the doors across the street and into my building. She told me I needed to get out of there as fast as possible. Without even thinking, I walked calmly toward my office door and down the row of desks. I told everyone along the way they needed to exit the building as well. Just as I reached the stairwell, I heard gunshots from behind me. About eye level on the wall next to the door was the fire alarm. I slammed my hand down on it, and I couldn't help but cringe when the loud alarm began to blare overhead. That's when I felt a hand grasp my forearm from behind and pull me backward. "You shouldn't have done that!" The man's voice sounded very raspy. I turned to face him, knowing I had a better chance of fighting him off if we were face to face. I could somewhat predict what he was going to do next. "Everyone down on the ground now! I don't want to hurt anyone, but I will if I have to. Got it?" He looked around after he said that, like someone would have the guts to actually answer this man. He was still holding on to me at that point, and it was starting to hurt. I just stared at the guy. I had no idea what he planned, or why he'd come here in the first place. I, nor anyone in the building, had interest in questioning him. "Alright, since you're the one who set off the fire alarm, you're gonna be the one to turn it off." He looked more annoyed than anything when he said that. My voice was shaky, and I finally worked up the courage to answer him. "I don't know how to turn it off. That's something the fire department does." He rolled his eyes and shoved me into a chair. "Then you're gonna call the fire department and tell them everything is alright here and it was just a stupid misunderstanding, and you're gonna do it without complaining. Otherwise, I'm gonna shoot one of these very nice people here, okay?" He sat down next to me and let me use the computer to look up the phone number to the local fire department. When I finally reached them on the phone and repeated what the guy wanted me to say, they told me they were aware of the situation already. Thankfully, it was not on speaker, so when he asked me what they said, I was able to lie to him. A few minutes later, the alarm turned off, and the masked man continued his tirade about how life was not fair and God hated him, how his dad left when he was a kid, and that to him, making bad decisions while he was growing up was just what led him here. This man was telling us his whole life story, almost like he was trying to justify what he was doing. I was toward the back office, so I couldn't tell when the police would get there. I just knew that they had arrived from the look on his face, though, and the sweat now pooling on his shirt. That's when the phone calls started coming in. Hostage negotiator, I'm assuming. Every time they'd call, the man would get angrier and angrier and demand the most outrageous things. At first, he wanted a car to drive away and for no one to follow. Classic demand. That escalated to him begging whoever was on the other end of the phone for a helicopter to land on the roof of the building and fly him away. A fake passport, $10 billion in cash. I was scared, but something was also telling me this was winding down. If he was going to hurt someone, he would have already done so. Eventually, he started letting a few of us go at the time. I was among the last 3 still trapped inside with him. It had been hours, and I was exhausted mentally and physically. Just done. The phone calls became less frequent. He became even more antsy, just so genuinely desperate for a way to get out of there that didn't involve jail time. To be totally honest with you, some strange part of me actually started to feel bad for the guy. As he continued to explain his rough, unfortunate life, I couldn't help but wonder how things could have ended up differently. After some time, he finally let the rest of us go out of the building. My mother was standing there waiting for me. I ran into her arms so fast. Only minutes after exiting the front doors, a loud gunshot was heard coming from the building. The police all rushed in. Turns out he decided ending his life was a better option than going to prison for his crimes. He chose my office to do so, which only made me feel that much worse. I watched as they brought him out in a body bag and loaded him into the city's coroner's van. I found myself standing there, watching as the van drove away and the police cleared the scene. The man had no funeral. No one cared about his passing, considering there wasn't even an obituary written for him. Just his death announced in the local paper, tied into the article about what happened that day. I requested to switch offices, of course, and to this day the view outside the window just doesn't look the same. Some part of it now felt tainted, like the happiness I once saw in the world was clouded by the harsh reality I hadn't realized before, that one person isn't always the only one to blame for the sad or dark outcome of their life. All I can say in the end is that I hope in death he finally found the peace he was so desperately searching for in life. I guess the only reason I'm even telling this story is to somehow try and move past the things that happened that day and the trauma and scars it left on me. My therapist says to move on. I have to talk about it, and I don't want to talk to anyone I actually know. Here I am telling strangers on the internet about the worst day of my life. I live in what some people would call a third world country. I'm from the United States originally, but but I moved to this place when I was relocated for work. Honestly, I figured it wouldn't be that bad considering I was a man and men are usually treated well in that country. I don't want to name exactly where this was because I don't want things to turn political, or for people to make assumptions about what happened just based on the place. Part of me is also worried that if I tell you where this happened, you'd find an article about it online and find out who I am. Maybe that's just the paranoia though. Anyway, a little bit about me. I'm currently 32 years old, but when this happened, I was in my late 20s. I was somewhat overweight and didn't get out very much, so when my job needed someone to relocate to another country, I volunteered. I figured it would be the push I needed to try new things and go new places. I had to take 5 flights just to get there, and by the time the last flight landed, I was completely exhausted and not at all excited about starting work in a whole new place. I had a few days to settle into my new apartment before my first day at the office about 30 minutes away. What I do isn't exactly super interesting. Lots of paperwork and phone calls, really. A part of me didn't even understand why they actually needed me to be there. Everything I was doing was something that could be done back home. But I was already there now, and I had a contract for 1 year, so I had to stick it out whether I liked it or not. Got to the apartment and was immediately disappointed. It looked nothing like the pictures that had been posted online. In fact, it was a whole different layout. When I tried to complain to the building manager, he just stared at me until I realized he couldn't even understand what I was saying. I made my way back up to my cockroach-infested apartment and had no hope for the next year. I immediately regretted my decision to come here, but unfortunately there was no going back now. My first day went okay, actually. No one cared I was there, and for the most part everyone left me alone. My boss barely spoke any English, so we said as much as we could to each other in terms of introductions before I went and sat down at my dusty old desk. It seemed this was going to be the whole next year of my life. The first week was alright. I noticed a few of my coworkers staring at me and whispering things to each other while they did. I honestly didn't care at all though, considering I had no idea what they were saying anyway. I like keeping to myself. It made the time pass by faster when I zoned out everything else. I even bought myself a pair of noise-canceling headphones to make it even quieter. Next month, I got a notice not to come in for a few days since they were remodeling. I happily stayed home, and thank God for the time off. It was much needed. By the time I went back to work, they had added all new cubicles and lots of furnishing as well. It was much nicer. Honestly, it made me want to stay at work longer, to escape all the bugs in my apartment building. I found myself soon working 12-hour days. At first, I would have thought this would be an issue for the company, considering 4 of those hours were overtime. But it didn't seem to be a problem. I was actually getting so much work done, I got an email from corporate congratulating me on how fast I was helping the branch catch up with their late work. By month 3, I had the whole routine down. I woke up at 6 a.m. every morning, made myself breakfast, checked the news. Then, 7:30, I began my walk to work, and by 8, I was there. Usually, I was the first person there as well. I would put on my noise-canceling headphones and get right to work. Some days, I wouldn't take them off at all. This was one of those days. I got to work at 8 a.m. as usual. Everything seemed very normal. I sat down at my desk, plopped in my trusty noise-canceling headphones, and got right to work. I loved sitting in those cubicles because they secluded me so much more than regular desks. Even in the little doorway to the cubicle, I added a curtain to block myself off more. It was like my own little room where no one ever disturbed me. It was great. I got to work, and for the next few hours, everything went smoothly. I kept my head down, did my work as usual. Everything was like every other day. At around 1 p.m. though, I felt a vibration underneath my feet of a lot of footsteps walking quickly out of the office. It even felt like some people might be running, but it was lunchtime and I naively chalked it up to people heading out to lunch. I never even lifted my head to see what was going on. By 1:15, the power had suddenly gone out. The whole floor was dark, with only bits of sunlight peering in between the blinds on the windows. I removed my headphones and stood up, and that's when I realized I was the only person still in the office. I walked to our manager's doorway, but he was also nowhere to be found. and that's when I noticed the smoke. It had gone from completely clear air in the room to smoke so thick I could barely see 5 feet in front of me in the span of only 10 minutes. It was seeping from the ground below me. I started to cough so hard, it felt like my lungs were going to burst out of my chest. I started to make my way to the stairwell, but with every step it felt like my body was getting heavier and heavier. At some point I ripped off my shirt, balled it up and shoved it against my mouth and nose to try and filter the air. I knew my lungs had already absorbed a lot of smoke, but I had to do something. The ground underneath me was hot, burning hot. My shoes were almost melting, and the bottoms of my feet were being branded like white-hot metal. It was excruciating. I had about 50 feet between me and the stairwell door, but to me in this situation, it felt like 500 feet. At that point, the walls around me even started to catch fire. The flames were so hot that even when I was standing 20 feet away from them, they were burning my skin. I was terrified. It was like I was a kid again. All I wanted was my dad to come and save me from this horrible situation. I started to pray, praying every second that I was in the building. Every second I felt my skin burning away. Please God, let me survive this. Give me the strength to escape this building. Every step I took was like walking on lava. I was determined to live though. The building around me even started to fall apart as I was now surrounded by flames. At 1:35 p.m., I made it to the stairwell door. I placed my hand on the door handle, and the searing pain of the metal touching my skin had me pulling my hand back so fast I hit myself in the chest. I had to think quickly. I lowered my shirt from my mouth and wrapped it around my hand. I knew the handle would still be hot, but any barrier was better than none. I braced myself for the pain I was about to experience, and again set my hand on the knob and pulled it open quickly. It hurt, but at this point, I think my body was going into shock. I felt my legs burning, and when I looked down, I saw my pants had burned away entirely from my body. My legs were now exposed to the flames and heat that had started to engulf me. I knew I had to make a decision. I had to go as fast as I could down those stairs, no matter how painful it would be, or I would die. I took as deep a breath as I could and began jumping down the stairs. I skipped as many as I could in hopes it would get me down faster. I screamed in pain with each step, but eventually I found myself on the bottom floor, in front of the door that would lead me to salvation. The stairwell had begun to fall apart above me, pieces of metal and wood raining down as I pushed against the door. Once outside, I was greeted by firemen yelling in my face in a language I didn't understand. The shock must have worn off, because then everything went black. The next thing I remember, I was in the hospital. The doctor told me that 70% of my body had been seriously burned, but I would likely survive. The pain even in the hospital was excruciating. I called my mom and dad, who were already arranging for me to be transported home for better medical care. I was in the hospital in that foreign country for 2 months before I was stable enough to be moved. The worst part was the debridement, which is where they remove dead tissue from your wounds. They were literally taking off chunks of skin to ensure I didn't get an infection. I knew it was part of the treatment process, but it felt like literal torture. For the longest time, I blamed my coworkers. I felt like they'd left me there to die. In reality, because I was so isolated, my boss told me they didn't even know I was still there. I'd made no sound throughout the whole day, and because I always arrived at work 30 minutes early, no one had actually seen me come in. My resentment toward them eventually went away, and I realized it was not their fault. As it turned out, a car had caught on fire parked in the alleyway next to the building. Because the building was so old, it was made of cheap materials, and they'd caught fire easily as well. There was no stopping it. Apparently, my boss thought that everyone had gotten out. I guess no one had thought to get a total head count. Apparently, when I'd come out of the building, everyone was shocked and terrified to see I'd been in there the entire time. Recovery has been one of the hardest things I've ever gone through, but I'm grateful I escaped with my life. One thing I've learned from all of this is that it really doesn't pay to be a totally isolated loner. Make sure someone knows where you are at all times. I live in a big city, It's not where I pictured living, but finding a job in a small town like the one I grew up in just was not working out. I'd gone to community college a few towns over, since it was the only higher education school within a 50-mile radius. There were not exactly many options. Pretty much no options, actually. I didn't consider moving for school, since I had no money and my parents had only offered to pay for my schooling if I stayed home while attending. They were the extremely controlling type. They even still tried to give me a curfew when I was 20 years old. I put a stop to that mentality pretty quick though. Maybe it was the fact that I'm their only child, but I had to let them know that as an adult, they couldn't tell me everything to do anymore. It was quite hard for them to accept at first, but they learned to respect my boundaries, and I learned that compromise in a situation is sometimes better than arguing. Eventually, I graduated with an associate degree in journalism. I was extremely excited. I knew I didn't want to do anything in the political field. Those journalists are hated so much. I wanted to write about something a little more lighthearted and fun. I wanted to work for a magazine, maybe fashion or something like home decor. It seemed more fun than business or finance or politics, where everything is so deadly serious all the time. The only problem was, there were no writing jobs in my area. The only options job-wise were the local grocery store that people started working at when they were teenagers and never left, or the gas station where all the junkies hang out all the time. Neither of those sounded like appealing options exactly. I didn't want to be one of those people that commute 3 hours to work a day either. Since the city was the only real place that had options, I decided I'd move finally. At first, I didn't know where. I'd considered Los Angeles, but all the writing jobs down there were about celebrities. You know, OMG, he went where with her? Such meaningless drivel in my opinion. I thought about Seattle, but then I remembered the awful weather they have up there. Rains all the time. No thanks. That's when I settled on New York City. I found a couple of places that were hiring for writing positions. I was absolutely interested in all of them, and I applied to them all as well. Of course, I was hoping that even one would take me at that moment. I wanted it more than anything in the world. I'd already found a room to rent in an apartment with 3 other girls for a reasonable price, by New York City standards. Everything in me was telling me this was going to be a good thing, but man was I wrong. I don't know if bigger cities just have more creeps or if they're all just really bold, but sheesh, I hated all the unnecessary attention I was constantly getting literally everywhere I went. Even just walking up the street or up the stairs to my apartment, I'd be harassed everywhere. It was uncomfortable and really started to get to me. My roommates all told me it was normal, and if I wanted to live in the city, I'd have to learn to get used to this. That just made me even more angry about it all. That it was something so normal to be experienced there, something to just be brushed off and forgotten about the second it happened. It's not like there was anything I could do about it though. I was too scared to say anything back to those people. I guess I did eventually get used to it, and I learned to ignore it as well. I'd gotten a job for a pretty well-known magazine. I wasn't exactly writing any star articles, but I was excited to be there nonetheless. I got a paid internship. I didn't make much, but the experience and opportunity to learn was worth it. Unfortunately, the harassment didn't stop when I entered the workplace. It was actually somewhat worse. The men in the top positions in the building felt emboldened by their status, and obviously knew no one would do anything to them when they did something anyone else would consider wrong. I found myself in an awful position, in a place where anyone I told would just tell me to keep my mouth shut about it all, and that the stuff I was saying wasn't something anyone talked about. There was this one day, after I'd been working with the company for about 6 months, when I was called into one of the higher-ups' offices. I knocked before entering and was told to come in. I noticed right away he was an older man, probably in his 60s. He sat at a large desk in front of a huge window with the most beautiful view overlooking the city. He must have seen me staring, because he offered to let me stand by him to get a better look. I thought it was a nice gesture. I made my way next to him and stood admiring the city I now called home. He was sitting directly next to me and had turned his chair to join me in looking out the window. And that's when I felt it, his hand traveling up my thigh and making its way up the rest of my butt. I don't even know the words to express my feelings in that moment. It was a mixture of a bunch of emotions. I was angry at the fact he felt he could touch me, scared I was alone in the room with this man, and shamed that it had been about 30 seconds and I still hadn't swatted his hand away. I was scared of what would happen when I did. I couldn't let it go on any longer though. I pushed away from him and asked him what he was doing. He pretended not to know what I was referring to, and like I had made the whole thing up. After arguing with him for a couple of minutes, I decided going to HR was my best option. I made my way to the elevator and pressed the floor I was going to. The second the doors closed, I burst out crying. The elevator dinged and signaled it was my stop. I got out and made my way to the office, where an older woman was sitting behind the desk. I told her there was something I wanted to report, and she very bluntly told me that if it had anything to do with the guy who had just touched me, there was no point, and I should get back to work. I was confused how she knew that's what I was there for, but eventually I understood. I wasn't the only person he'd done this to. I wasn't the only person who'd come to HR to try and report him either. I was always told that whenever something like this happens, to tell someone about it to get help if I needed it. There I was trying to do exactly that, and the person who was supposed to help me was adamant to drop it. The next day, I was called into his office again. I was only an intern, and whenever the other male interns were called in, he would only ask for coffee or for them to run some paperwork. When he asked for me, I would always ask one of the guys to go for me. I was scared of that man and what he might do if I stepped into his office again. Later that day, I got an email from him. It said something like, "The next time I ask for you, it better be you who comes. Don't forget, I can end your career in the city before you can even blink." It was intimidating. Of course it was intimidating. There I was, a 21-year-old girl, faced with a man telling me he was going to ruin my career if I didn't do what he asked. The next day, obviously, he asked for me again. I entered his office and stayed right by his door, so I couldn't give him a way to get close to me, and I had a quick exit if needed. He began telling me about articles the magazine had published the day before. He sounded weird, though. The way he talked wasn't his usual manner of speaking. He began to stutter and his body was shaking. I only realized what he'd been doing when he let out a loud moan and rolled his head back. Yeah, he was doing exactly what you think. I yelled at him that he was disgusting and ran out as fast as I could. Honestly, I didn't care about that internship at that point. I didn't care about anything that man had to say about me around the city. I could find another job somewhere else if I had to move. I didn't care, but I wouldn't let him get away with what he was doing. I went to the police, and they told me that without proof there wasn't anything they could do. I filed a report anyways. I went back to the apartment and told my roommates what happened. Of course, they were as creeped out and disgusted as me, but shockingly told me to keep the internship. They said the job was so good that having to put up with one pervy man was worth it. I tried complaining to HR again, this time insistent I be moved to a different floor. I was willing to try to find a new job, but I kind of needed this one to pay rent while I looked for a different one. I was moved a few floors down, and for the next couple of weeks after that, I had no issues. That's when the emails started coming in. They were always from a new anonymous email address, and every single one always contained a nude photo, always from the same person. Unfortunately, I could tell. I informed the police, who again told me there was nothing they could do. I started hating everything about that city. I hated how everyone told me this was normal and I should put up with it. I wanted someone to listen to me and agree that what I was going through was not okay. I knew who was sending me those photos, and I couldn't take it anymore. I sent an email to everyone in the office detailing what had happened to me. I explained everything I went to and how many times I'd tried to report it to HR, and they did nothing to help me. Then I quit. For the next few days, I got emails from other women in the office telling me they had experienced the same or similar things with the man who had touched me. I was mad that no one would do anything about it, but at least everyone knew now. I never went back, so I never saw the fallout from my email myself. I hope he got what he deserved, although I know he probably didn't. I found a job at a different company that I adore working at. I'm treated great and can gladly say I've not experienced anything like that since. To any woman out there who's going through or has gone through something similar, and they feel like there's no one out there who understands or who listens, just know you're not alone. Back in 2018, I ended up flying over to Greece for a week-long solo vacation. There were a few hotels I'd had my eye on while planning the trip, but then, for the same price, I found I could get an entire apartment on Airbnb. Some of the stuff they had available for rent was absolutely amazing too. For the price of an entire ensuite hotel room, I could get an apartment that looked like something a legitimate millionaire might choose to stay in during a visit to the French Riviera or something. Greece doesn't exactly have the strongest economy, so it kind of made sense it would be going for so cheap. Even so though, compared to the other listings, there was certainly no other way to describe it other than suspiciously affordable. Like any other sane person might have done, I immediately went and checked all the reviews to make sure. Even with all the 5-star reviews and glowing praise of the apartment's owner, I still thought the whole thing was just way too good to be true. Then again though, there were only 2 windows where the place was not fully booked. So not only did that show that the other people were genuinely interested in the place, but it also meant it was a first-come, first-served sort of deal, so to speak. I could book the place, check it out, then if it turned out to be some well-distinguished nightmare, I could maybe just find myself a hotel chain with a simpler but more reliable kind of room. The flight over to Greece was the first long flight I'd been on, and the whole process just completely exhausted me. It's weird that just sitting on a plane for 10 hours can do that to a person. I guess it was mainly the stress that took it out of me. Worrying that I'd lost my passport to e-ticket, constantly worrying I'd left something crucial back at home, all irrational first-time flyer stuff, I know. But after the relief of landing without a hitch and making it to the Airbnb okay, I felt like I could sleep for days on end. Even the elation of seeing the apartment didn't keep me up for long either, and my God, was I surely elated. It was everything I could possibly have imagined. A magnificent mosaic of black and white tiles and wrought iron spiral staircases. Hell, they could have charged double the asking price and people still would have paid to stay in a place like that. The question remained though, why exactly did it have such a low rate? I know, it was a huge question, one that any right-minded person would have still been asking themselves. I guess the place's beauty and my exhaustion made for a perfect cocktail to wipe my brain of thought though. I told myself I could always properly survey the place the next morning, after a good night's sleep. I remember waking up just before dawn though, to the sound of something scraping really close right next to me. I mean, maybe scraping isn't the right word. I ended up leaning over to the bedside table, switching on the light and seeing what was definitely a cockroach running for the darkness below the bed. I hate bugs, and cockroaches have to be at the top of the list for me. Suddenly, I understood why the pricing was so low. The entire building had an infestation they just couldn't get rid of. Maybe they couldn't afford to have the place bug-bombed or whatever. They were hoping for a few quick bucks from the Airbnb so they could afford it. That little theory of mine made much more sense when the owners refused me any kind of refund, giving me some bullcrap about how Greece has lots of bugs in the summer. Apparently, other guests didn't have a problem with it, so these guys knew what they were doing, acting as though a roach infestation was like having a few houseflies. If it wasn't already clear, there was no way in hell I was about to spend another night in that place that had roaches crawling all over during the night. Luckily, I hadn't actually unpacked yet. I was able to just grab my stuff, jump in the rental, and drive down through town towards the harbor front, where I knew that there were a bunch of hotels awaiting me. As I was driving, though, I started to feel like there was something wrong with my left ear. It kind of felt cold on the inside. I started thinking maybe I had some kind of ear infection. that the exhaustion and stress of flying had messed with my immune system. As I was driving on my way to book a new hotel room and start an epic email battle to get a refund though, it wasn't like I was in much a position to do anything about it. Thing is, too, it was like 5 or 6 in the morning at that point, so it's not like any local clinics were open yet for me to get a once-over. When the weird feeling in my ear started getting even worse, I decided to pull over near the harbor front and stick a cotton swab in my ear to see if there was any blood or pus or anything. Apologies to those who find that a little gross, but if you did, stop reading now, because things are about to get way worse. I pulled over, fished around for a little Tupperware box of bathroom-related stuff, and pulled out a cotton swab. I gently pushed one end into my ear. Then, as I did, I felt something actually moving inside. At the time, I couldn't tell if it was because I'd pushed a clump of earwax or something further up my ear canal, but when I pulled the swab out again, I saw these 2 real thin, dark brown things stuck to the tip. I remember looking at them and thinking, what the hell are these? Suddenly, the thought hit me like a brick wall. I kind of wiggled my head again and felt the same weird movement in my ear. That's when I realized something that was like a worst nightmare come to life. There had been roaches near my bed when I woke up, and something was moving around in my ear. Those 2 little things on the cotton swab were roach legs. There were roaches inside my ear canal. I was in complete denial for a minute or two, trying to talk myself into it being anything else. When I actually accepted what was happening, I started to hyperventilate. It took me a while to calm down, but when I did, the next move was to grab a pair of tweezers I had with me. I carefully inserted them into my ear and tried to coax the roach out all on my own. I can barely describe the horrifying feeling, working the tweezers in and touching the roach, only feeling it scuttle further into my ear canal. It was like it was trying to burrow into my brain. I know that's not exactly how ears and brains work, and they're not remotely connected in such a close way, but in my groggy, terrified state, it felt like it was trying to bite through my eardrum. The more I tried, the more it crawled in further. I realized if I was actually going to get these things out of my ear, I'd have to go to the actual hospital. That's how I ended up driving over to Post-Racist University Hospital, and throughout the whole of that drive, I was acutely aware of the thing now trying to burrow its way further in. At this point, I feel I should make it clear that while it was not explicitly painful, it was the worst kind of mental torture I'd ever experienced. Walking into the ER was the first real piece of luck I got that day. Because it was so early on a Monday morning, there was next to no one else waiting to be seen. After a mother-daughter combo got themselves seen too, I was called up to the desk to tell them what my problem was. The first nurse I spoke to didn't even speak English, so I had to wait a few more minutes while she found someone that did. When I finally got the chance to explain the situation, she had this look on her face that told me she clearly didn't believe me. She asked me if I was in pain. I was about to say no, but then I felt so nauseated I was about to puke. She still seemed skeptical, but she took me to see the doctor anyway, who looked in my ear with an otoscope. Although I don't speak Greek, the muted reaction the doctor had told me there was definitely some insects in my ear. Using the nurse as a translator, the doctor told me the most important thing was for me to keep calm. I was told that getting it out would be relatively easy, but if I didn't keep calm, things were going to get pretty bad. Hearing that was hardly relaxing. The nurse advised me to control my breathing and focus on the fact everything was going to be okay. After that, another nurse took my blood pressure, which turned out to be alarmingly high. I had no idea why they were doing all these tests on me. I'm sure they had their reasons, but I was desperate for them to get to the actual extraction already. Thankfully, that's the next thing they did. The nurse explained all the stuff the doctor was saying, like how they were going to use lidocaine as a prep for getting the roach out. The lidocaine did its job alright and acted as a numbing agent, but before it did, the roach went into overdrive trying to escape the incoming fluid. That was the worst it ever felt for me. I'm glad it was over after that, but literally being able to feel the thing dying and scrambling about in my ear, just suddenly slowing down as it died. I'm not sure there are words in the English language to sum out the horrifying nature of it all. About 2 minutes after feeling it succumb, the doctor took these big curved tweezers and started removing the roach, but not in one go. He did it piece by piece. Once the whole thing was out of me, the nurse showed me what they'd removed on a napkin. I guess it would have been about an inch long when it was intact, which normally is not all that big, but with it in your ear canal, that's pretty damn huge. After that, my ear canal was given one final check over, just to make sure there was nothing left behind. They told me I was free to go, with a prescription for oral antibiotics and a type I would need to put directly into my ear for a while. The whole thing felt numb for the next 24 hours. As the week went on, it didn't really feel any better either. I guess it was just the aftermath of having my ear invaded by both a cockroach and a pair of surgical tweezers. The half-dead scratching sensation in my ear, though, just wouldn't stop. When I got back to Baltimore, I went over to my doctor to get checked up again. About a week after I got back from Greece, I went for my appointment and told her about the whole cockroach trauma. Just to be safe, she asked a physician's assistant to flush my ear out, in hopes that removing any wax buildup would help my hearing and get rid of the pressure. Once my ear had been flushed, they took a look inside. I can't even begin to explain how much my heart sank when I heard the physician assistant say she saw what she believed to be another spiky insect leg inside my ear canal. I felt sick. The whole ordeal was not even over. All I wanted was for it to finally end. The doctor ended up flushing my ear again, pulling out even more pieces of a roach that the doctors hadn't even seen. This was almost 2 whole weeks after the first incident took place. I cried quietly while the whole thing was going on. My doctor was amazing. She actually gave me a hug when the whole thing was done. She'd been my family doctor for years, so we had quite a close relationship like that. She comforted me and told me there might still be more inside. She was going to make me an emergency appointment the next day. When the appointment was over, I went home and tried my best to relax before heading to the ENT clinic the next morning. When I got there, they sat me in an examination chair. Then the ear, nose, and throat doctor placed some sort of microscope next to my head. He didn't say much at all. The whole examination took place in silence, right up until he said the dreaded words of, "Oh yeah, there's still something in there all right." The next thing I know, he's using what looked like a large pair of scissors with a blunt end to fish around in my ear canal for more bugs. That time, no kind of numbing agent was used, so it was actually quite painful. I could hear pieces of bugs crunching as he gripped them and pulled them out, even when he finished, and had flushed my ear out with water again, to the point he was 99% sure everything was eliminated. I still didn't feel that much better. That surprised me. I figured that once everything was out, I'd actually feel free of the whole thing, but I didn't. Instead, I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that so many bugs had existed in my ear for like 2 weeks, meaning there was a chance I was still going to develop a nasty ear infection. I've only really gotten over the whole thing over the past year or so, but even so, I'm deathly afraid of any crawling insect now that might sneak its way into my ear at night. I'm not nearly as bad as I used to be, but it's definitely still a thing for me, and I don't expect to be over it anytime soon. Hello, my name is Ninon, and I'm French. My story takes place in a small countryside in the south, a place where nothing usually happens. As I tell you this story, I must note it's now been 2 years since it happened, and I was 13 years old at the time. One evening, my parents decided to go have dinner at a friend's house, but I preferred to stay home. It was a Friday night, and I was dead tired. It was actually quite common for my parents to leave me alone at home in the evening, because I rarely went with them when they went out to eat or go to parties. I was used to being alone at night. I must admit that I often had this feeling of being watched when I was home alone, whether it was day or night, but I always thought it was just paranoia, at least until that night. So we're at the infamous night when my parents went to dinner at their friend's house, leaving me alone. I was watching TV on the couch with my cat. when I decided to go back to my room to play on my phone a bit. After several minutes, though, I began to hear noises coming from the kitchen. It was actually quite a common thing because of the age of the house with it settling in, so I chalked it up to being fatigue and stress making me overthink things. A little while later, though, I heard what sounded distinctly like a glass being placed down on the dining table. The stress became more and more intense, and I did the dumbest thing I could do in that moment. I went to go see what was going on, only to find there was indeed a glass that hadn't been there before, placed on the dining table. It couldn't have been from me either. My stress rose even more. At the same time, though, I was in denial and told myself I must have left it there while clearing it. As I was about to return to my room, though, I heard something scratching behind the garage door. I was about to open it, thinking it must be my cat wanting to come in, but then I froze as I reached for the handle. I remembered our only cat had been on the couch with me earlier. I turned my head to check if he was still there, and unfortunately he was. So was my dog as well. At that moment, I was genuinely worried. I rushed back to my room, only to notice on the way back that my parents' bedroom window and the bathroom window as well were wide open. At that point, I didn't know what to do. I locked myself in my room with my cat and dog and scrolled through my phone trying to forget anything had happened. When my parents finally came back, I acted as if nothing had happened as well. I don't really know why I did this. I guess I was so scared I wasn't thinking properly. But currently, no one else knows about this story. So this happened a long time ago, but I've never forgotten it, as it was one of the strangest encounters my family and I have ever had. One time as a child, I went with my family to the grocery store. It was our monthly trip to stock up on groceries, so we were going to be there for quite a while. I was about 12 at the time, so by that age I had a good understanding of how to read people. We started in the produce aisle, when suddenly a strange man caught my eye. He was standing awkwardly close to us, sort of fake browsing through everything. His body language seemed off as well. He was standing with his back to us, but something was weird about the way he was positioned. As we moved down the aisle, he would always rotate so his back was facing us. As we got a little closer, I could tell he was wearing those see-behind glasses. Those gimmick sunglasses that have hidden mirrors on the inside of the lenses so you can see behind yourself. Yeah, that sort of thing. He had a dirty gray zip-up jacket on, and long messy hair as well. Had to be in his 40s at least. As our shopping went on, wherever we went, I would see him standing there, staring at me from across the store. He would keep his distance from us always, but still be within eyesight no matter where we were. About 30 minutes in, my mom still hadn't noticed, but he was really starting to bother me. Unfortunately, my mom didn't believe me at first. Eventually, we got to the refrigerator aisles, and that's when it got really weird. Whatever aisle we were in, he would quickly pace past us occasionally. At that point, he wasn't even trying to look like he was shopping. It was so obvious that my mom and sis were also starting to notice as well, and get quite concerned. At one point, we were grabbing something off one of the shelves, and I could see him just standing on the opposite aisle, peeking in between them at us. His sunglasses were on still, but now he had his hood up all the way. We started to walk faster and do random zigzags around the store to see if he really was following us. At least we could try to lose him. He would always keep up though, all in a very sneaky way at that. He would always just appear at the opposite end of the aisle, keeping up with us the whole time. At this point, we pushed up to the customer service area to talk to a manager about it, and at that point the man completely disappeared. We informed the manager and she was very helpful. She actually went to go try and find the guy and talk to him. We waited at the counter until she paced back to us with a confused look on her face. She walked up to my mother and told us, "He said you're his mom." At this point, my mom and sister were quite concerned and confused. The manager rang us up herself and said we should leave, and they would escort the strange man away. We walked out to the car, staying close to our mother, when we were met with a horrible sight. The man was just standing across the parking lot from our car, with his head tilted and a big grin on his face. We floored it out of there, but we could still see him standing there, watching us leave the whole time. This was back in 2018, when I lived in the suburbs of Paris. I've been playing Pokemon Go since release, and I used to go out at night to play as well, always with my best friend on a voice call. It was a night just like any other, following my usual route. It was around 2 a.m. or so, and I had already covered a good 2 kilometers. I found myself about 1 kilometer away from home, standing near a Pokestop, and catching what I could while talking to my friend, just like every other night. It was a residential street with a few streetlights, but quite dark as there was only a field behind it. After about 5 minutes, though, I noticed a man in his 30s on the opposite sidewalk, just a few meters away. He was holding some hedge shears in his hand, and there was a pile of branches at his feet as well. I thought the man must have been trimming the branches of his tree or something. However, when I described the scene to my friend, he said immediately, "You should leave right now. No one does gardening in the middle of the night like that." Despite my friend's warning, I was so focused on Pokemon Go and wanting to capture all the Pokemon before leaving, I stayed while keeping an eye on the man's actions. I wanted to, at least. As I looked at the man, I realized he was not cutting any branches. He was only staring at me. He would occasionally move and hide as well, behind a parked van nearby, trying to spy on me through the windows. He must have known very well that I could still see him. I began to feel scared at this point. Despite my friends pleading for me to leave, I was frozen in place and hesitated to move. I was enraptured by this man's strange behavior. He began crossing over to my side of the street and hiding behind some bushes while staring at me. Then he went back to his pile of branches, pretending to clip them while staring at me again. At that point, I had enough. I finally decided to leave. I walked toward my home, trying not to show any fear. I had a straight path back there. My friend on the call, though, told me to keep checking behind me, just in case the man was following me. Indeed, he was still holding his hedge shears, only about 10 meters behind me now. I then made a left turn instead of going straight, even though it made the way home longer. I wanted to make sure he was following me, and this wasn't just a coincidence. He continued to do so. I picked up my pace, taking snaps of the man just in case something happened. When I reached the end of the street, I was out of breath but safe. There was no one behind me anymore. I entered my home feeling relieved, when suddenly, a white car pulled up right in front of my house. It stopped and the driver's window rolled down, revealing the man with his hedge shears. Now he knew where I lived. I rushed inside, locked everything, and grabbed a kitchen knife, and waited until someone woke up so I could go to bed. There were no further incidents after, and nobody believed me either. We checked surveillance cameras to prove that it happened, and unfortunately I was proved right in the end. This story happened when I was younger and braver, and did a lot of stupid things without thinking beforehand. It's quite a wild ride, and it's all true as well. I used to work at a pizza shop down the street from 2 p.m. until closing. I usually didn't get off until 11 or so at night because of this. I did have a car, but it was close enough to walk, so I mostly did that to save gas. This particular night, I was doing my usual thing, jamming to one of my playlists and very tired. I was happy to have such a good job though, and generally happy with the way my life was going. Up ahead, about a block or so from my place, I saw a pretty attractive guy in dark clothing walking around. Not with much purpose really. He was taller than me, about 5'10" to 6'ish or so, and had shaggy brown hair. The closer I got to him, the more I could tell he was really good looking. Like even in the dark of night, I could feel myself blushing a little. His features kind of escape me now, but I do remember his hair and thick eyebrows. I took an earbud out, and because I'm from a dangerous city and never really cared about stranger danger, I decided to talk to him a bit. Hey, how's your night going? Oh, it's good, just looking to get drunk. Oh, that I can help with. I've got a mini bar at my place. I live just down the street if you want. That was not exactly verbatim how the conversation went. During the walk back to my place, I didn't really get any red flags from this guy either. He seemed totally normal and was actually pretty nice. I was honestly thinking, wow, through sheer luck I met this super hunky guy that seems cool and fun. I was beside myself really. We get to my apartment on the second floor. I jump into host mode and offer him to have a seat and make himself comfortable. The apartment was about 640 square feet in total, so it was pretty small. Except for the bathroom, you could pretty much see the rest of the apartment from any area inside. I headed into the kitchen, and while I was pouring the drinks, I glanced back over at him out of curiosity. It was then that I noticed the first red flag. As I was asking him questions, he was more delayed with his answers, especially more so than he was on our walk there. He was starting to act kind of odd. I go back over to the couch, pass him his drink, and sit down next to him. "So, what do you do for work?" I asked. "Oh, I'm not here for sex." He put down his drink on the table. "What do you mean? I'm not here for that either." He stood up. "What you got?" he asked me. His nice guy vernacular and friendly face were now gone. I was having a hard time understanding what he meant by that. I said, "What you got?" The second I stood up, he pushed me backward. I basically got knocked off my feet, hitting the floor but not hard enough to get knocked out or anything. I jumped right back up, but he'd already grabbed my laptop and my work bag. As I started towards him, he cut around me and made his way toward the front door. I was right behind him when he made it outside. I managed to grab a hold of him, and we tussled again in front of the door. Now I shouted out, calling on help from the neighbors. It was late at night though, so no one came. "Please help, I'm being robbed!" The thing is, he had my laptop. Not just any laptop, I hate to admit it, but my entire life was on that computer at the time. Important photos I didn't have backed up, thousands of dollars in music programs, video game programming stuff for a development team I helped, really expensive software. It was in my mind irreplaceable. I gave chase down the stairs across the dog walk park, and as I started to gain on him, we tussled again. The only thing I could focus on was my laptop. I knew I had to, at any cost, get that computer back. That was all I cared about. Somehow I got a grip on it. I tugged at it again. I guess he decided it was not worth all this struggle. He got up and started to take off once again. I realized he still had my work bag, which had my cell phone and my wallet in it. I ran after him again. This time he shouted back at me, "Follow me and I'll stab you again." This made me stop in my tracks as he got away. Underneath a street lamp nearby along the sidewalk, I immediately started to inspect myself. I was stabbed? No way. There was no way that just happened. Then I saw blood running down my leg. I saw blood pouring down my arm too. I saw two places where he cut me real good. I was scared, but the blood made it look worse than it was. I decided that was enough. I got my laptop, and that's all I really needed anyway. I hobbled back home, got inside, and locked my door. I called the cops using my neighbor's friend's phone the next day, and filed a police report explaining the situation, showing the stab wounds. I also declined medical services, since I couldn't afford that at the moment. In the end, all that guy got was a crappy cell phone and a wallet with like $30 in it. The cop called my friend back several days later and said they were not able to find the guy and that they would keep me posted in the future. That was years ago, so I don't know where the robber is now. but I have every electronic thing of importance backed up on multiple drives to this day. I'm a woman in my 30s who lives alone in a small house at the head of a quiet cul-de-sac in the UK. The street is a maze of roads away from the main road, which means that other than delivery guys and the occasional salesperson, you will rarely ever see anyone you don't recognize. I don't exactly know all my neighbors even. I do know what they look like though, and I at least know the area around where they live. I can recognize some of their cars, etc. This weirdness happened over the space of a few months several years back. I work from home, so I'm usually inside. Sometimes I don't have a lot to do either. The first day was one of those lazy days. It was about 4 p.m. and I was sitting on the sofa, watching some daft shit about alien cover-ups. All of a sudden though, someone knocked on the door. I have a surveillance camera hidden in the wooden canopy above the front door, so I checked to see who was there. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, and I couldn't be bothered with any door-to-door person. Instead of any of that though, I saw a woman who looked to be in her early 50s, very smartly dressed with expensive clothes and jewelry as well, stuff I could never afford. Most people around here generally couldn't afford it either. It's not exactly an affluent area. This lady stuck out like a sore thumb because of this. She looked flustered and agitated, glancing toward the back garden, before trying to look through the tiny frosted glass window on the front door. I also noticed she was carrying a dog's lead but didn't have a dog with her. As it happens, at the far side of my back garden, there were 2 hedges. There's the hedge that I own within my property boundaries, and a second hedge outside my boundary that's council-owned, along a small grassland where people tend to walk their dogs. I know for a fact there's a hole in that council-owned hedge, which I've reported to the council at least a dozen times over the past decade, and they've done the square root of sod all about it. Because of my hedge, I can't reach into it and do anything myself. Consequently, when I saw the dog's lead, I thought, man, shit, I bet her dog leapt through that hole. If it was a big dog, it was not getting into my garden, but if it was a small dog, it might be able to work its way through. I figured maybe I could put out some meat and help her lure it out or something. I'm a dog lover, so I wanted to help the woman if I could. When I was a kid, my own dog went missing for several weeks, and I thought I was never going to get him back. I remember that heartbroken feeling as I looked at this woman outside. I opened the door, and the woman gave me the strangest look. It was like she hadn't been expecting me to actually answer the door, almost like I shouldn't be there. To be fair, my mom used to live here instead, so maybe she was expecting my mom or something. I said hello, and she just stared at me for 30 seconds. She kept on trying to look past me, as if trying to see someone else. Then she asked to see Margaret. I apologized and told her there was no Margaret at this address. Again, she gave me that look, only this time there was absolute anger behind it. Yes, there is, she insisted. It occurred to me at this point that I had a relative named Margaret, but she lived hundreds of miles away, and I hadn't seen her in years. Nonetheless, just in case she got the addresses muddled or something, I asked, "Are you looking for my aunt?" She just hissed at me. "You know exactly who I'm looking for. What have you done with her?" Absolutely lost at this point. I'd lived there for 20 years. I knew the name of the previous owner as well, so I knew she wasn't talking about them either. Not the names of the neighbors, not the names of people who have lived on the street in the time I'd been there and since moved away. Nobody was called Margaret. All I could do was tell her she had the wrong address. "No, this is my address. You're lying." It was a tad alarming. She had the right address. She hadn't knocked on the wrong door. However, she clearly thought I'd done something to somebody who, to my best knowledge, had never lived there. I don't know how long the previous owner had had this house, but we must have been talking at least 30 years since anyone called Margaret could have possibly lived there. At this point, I also noticed that she'd subtly wrapped the dog lead around her clenched fist, like she was planning to hit me or something. In my youth, I'd had plenty of self-defense training, so I was not exactly scared of this middle-aged woman, but I was obviously a bit concerned about the situation currently brewing. I didn't particularly fancy getting into a brawl on my doorstep with a stranger. I was torn between shutting the door in her face and asking what she really wanted. Look, I don't know who you think you're looking for, but if you think something happened to a friend of yours, maybe you should call the police and let them sort it out. Sure enough, the woman immediately took her fist with the lead wrapped around it and tried to punch at me. She slammed her fist into my door as I closed it. I discovered she'd struck the door hard enough to crack the frosted glass window right in the middle. In fact, her hand was bleeding. It must have hurt quite a bit, but she didn't flinch or show any signs of pain. What the hell? I didn't know what to do in this situation. All I could think now was she must be on something and having a really bad trip. In my scariest voice I could muster, I told her to get the fuck back. I let her know I was calling the police, and if she was still there when they got there, she could deal with them herself, because I was not dealing with her anymore. She tried to shove her hands in to stop me from closing the door, but I shoved her back and managed to slam it closed and lock it. At that point, I stood next to the door while calling 999. While I was waiting for the police to turn up, I watched her on the surveillance feed. She moved in and out of shot multiple times, presumably to check the back of the house. I could hear her calling out for this Margaret over and over. A few minutes before the police finally turned up, I saw her kick over my wheelie bins in a rage, and then the most chilling thing happened. She walked back to the front door and stared right up into the camera. The camera was pretty well hidden, too. I'm not saying it's like a ninja or anything and nobody could spot it, but most people would only know it was there if they'd been looking for it, and most people aren't looking for cameras, right? She knew it was there, must have eyeballed it previously. I reviewed all the footage I had from that day later, and she never made eye contact with it once, never looked in that direction. I checked everything I had as well, and she was only on camera that day. All I could think was she must have been there when the oldest footage got overwritten. While she was staring right into it, she made a throat-cutting gesture before walking off in a hurry. I headed to the window, watching her leave. She was walking like she didn't have a care in the world. The police finally showed up, took a statement, and I gave them a copy of the surveillance footage. I called a couple times to follow up, but nothing. Nobody ever called me back about it either. I won't lie, this did affect me for a few weeks. I moved the knife block closer to the door. I started staying up really late and not getting much sleep. On some nights, I was so tired I felt I was experiencing auditory hallucinations. Every time I heard the gate open, it put me on edge. I'd review the surveillance footage every day. Eventually, as the weeks passed on, I hadn't heard anything else, so I started to regain some of my comfort. I put it down to just a weird experience, but that didn't last. About 4 or 5 weeks after the first encounter, she suddenly appeared once again. It was just after midnight. I was in the living room mucking about on my phone, with the TV on low volume for some background noise. All of a sudden, I heard a car door slam outside and peeked out the front window. A dark-colored car was parked at the end of my driveway. I didn't see anyone moving about, but about a minute or two later, the front gate swung open with its heavy metallic groaning, and there was a knock at the door. Even if I wasn't involved in a blood feud over imaginary Margaret, I was not going to answer the door at that time. I checked the surveillance camera. The night vision mode was pretty shitty, but I was positive it was that woman again. I could even see the same dog lead. Of course, she must have known I was watching her, because she stared right into the camera. And let me tell you, when someone is already giving you the heebie-jeebies, the night vision makes people's eyes look soulless. Shut that fucking racket off and come out here now! I had the TV on, but like I mentioned, it was at a very low volume. There was no way she could hear it from outside the door. I couldn't even hear it if I walked to the hallway where the door was at. I was convinced she was mentally unwell. I called the police again. So I'm waiting and waiting for them to arrive, hoping she doesn't start trying to smash a window or something. She begins screaming and yelling, something I couldn't quite make out, but whatever it was enough for one of the neighbors to come and investigate themselves. I watched the neighbor talk to her for a minute. She was still angry about something, wagging her finger toward my front door, but my neighbor was eventually able to get her to leave. He even stuck around for a bit to make sure she was gone. Sadly, that also meant she'd gone before the police turned up again. Another statement, more nothing. I caught up with the neighbor the next day and he apologized because it didn't occur to him to make a note of the plate. He told me she'd said much the same thing as she'd said to me previously though. She wanted to know where Margaret was and what I'd done to her. I was grasping for answers at this point. Even if she was mentally unwell, the fact she was sticking so closely to this story and had the right address as well made me think there was something more to this than somebody just having a breakdown. Something clicked for me. Was Margaret her dog, maybe? Did she think I'd stolen her dog through the hole in the back or something? Did she think I'd hurt them? Is that what this was about? It would be another few weeks before she suddenly appeared again, this time at 3 a.m. I began to hear a light tapping on the bedroom window. I knew immediately it was her. I could hear her saying things, but I couldn't make them out through the muffled sound of the windows. It's like she didn't want the neighbor to come out again, so she was trying to be quiet. I jumped out of bed and put on my clothes as quickly as I could. I tried to follow her best I could as she moved around outside of the house from room to room, tapping and knocking on all the windows and muttering. I could hear her whispering a few coherent words like noise and racket. I'm pretty sure she kept calling me a bitch as well. I couldn't check the surveillance footage this time because she'd spray painted over the lens. She was staying out of sight of the front door as well. I thought about calling the police again, but it had proven a waste of time so far. I got the feeling if I called them a third time and she was already gone, they were going to start accusing me of wasting their time. Even if I did have the evidence, they'd not exactly been helpful so far. In the end, I waited by the front door and listened for her footsteps. Eventually, she knocked on it while I was standing in front. "Is Margaret your dog or something?" I called out. Dead silence. Nothing. I couldn't see anything because it was so dark. I had no idea where she was, and I didn't want to turn the lights on. I ended up standing there for who knows how long, at least an hour before the sun started to come up. My heart was going a mile a minute. Once it was bright enough, I started checking all the windows to see if I could see her anywhere. Nothing. I tentatively opened the front door and looked outside. I still couldn't see her. I grabbed something to arm myself with just in case. I can't even remember what now. I checked all around my house and the back garden. Nowhere to be found. As I was heading back to the front door, I spotted the oddest thing. The gate was closed. The gate that was physically attached to the side of my house. When it opened and closed, it made a fair bit of noise. You'd definitely hear it if someone opened it. You'd definitely hear it if someone opened or closed it when you were standing next to the front door. So what did that mean? Did she jump over it somehow? It's possible, I guess, but I wouldn't want to try it. Anyway, I opened the gate and headed out to the end of the driveway. I looked around, no signs of her still. I turned back to the house, only to see she'd spray-painted "liar" on the front and left the dog lead on the floor beneath it. That was thankfully the last time I heard of or saw this woman, but I still think she comes by sometimes. Ever since this all happened, I get these creeped-out feelings occasionally at night and check out the windows. I don't know whether I'm imagining it or not, but every now and again, too, I see that dark-colored car out on the street as well. Not parked right at the end of my driveway, mind you, but I can't shake the feeling she's there watching my house. Perhaps she really was looking for her dog and keeps thinking she'll see me with it. I have no idea what to make of all this. First of all, English is not my first language, so I'm sorry if some things sound a bit weird. This story takes place a few years ago, while I was still with my ex-girlfriend. I, male and 22, was around 17 or 18 in this moment. I was living with my parents in a small town of about 300 people. There were 3 farms in this town, which included a lot of fields. We had the habit of walking out in those fields thanks to a small path which was fairly old. There was place enough for 1 car, truck, or tractor. It was around the afternoon, 5 or 6 p.m. We decided to go out into a field and have a picnic. We could see the road and the people on the road could see us, so it would be fairly safe. The field belonged to my neighbor, who was okay with us doing things like this every now and then. The field was also separated from the road thanks to a barbed wire fence. We smoked some weed, we drank, we listened to music and ate. Everything was going well. At one point though, we heard a car park in the middle of the road. A man got out of the car and went into the bushes. At this point, I thought someone must have stopped because they had to use the restroom or something, but I kept an eye on him just in case. I talked with my girlfriend like I'd done all afternoon until then, when I looked back at where the man was. This time, he was no longer in the bush. He was standing still, crouching behind his car, looking right at us, motionless. I didn't say anything. I looked back at my girlfriend. I was feeling unnerved. I gave another quick look, only to see the man had now moved to the other end of his car and was doing the same thing. No motion, just looking at us crouching behind it. The process repeated 2 or 3 times, with him moving all around his car. I was suddenly feeling very weird. This situation couldn't possibly be normal. The guy then suddenly jumped into his car and drove away in a hurry. At this moment, I told my girlfriend to pack up our things. We were going to leave right now. She thought I was overreacting, thinking I was being paranoid because of the weed we had smoked. But still, she listened to my advice. We were back on the road, going the opposite direction the guy had gone. The road was a circle, though, with every way leading back to my house and then the main road. Guess who had turned around and was coming up right behind us in his car? That guy, now staring at us while driving. He kept driving around the road again and again, passing by us, multiple times. At this moment, my girlfriend told me I was right. We took his plate and tried to call my parents, but no one was answering. The last time the guy passed us by, I could clearly see something was now in his passenger seat, but I couldn't tell what. All of a sudden, my neighbor came up right behind him with his truck. I stopped my neighbor and told her what was going on. She told us to jump inside, and we went back to my parents' home. My dad is a cop, so I told him the plate number, and he looked into it. The car belonged to some old grandma and was apparently stolen. A few weeks later, as I did every day, I went to take my bus to the next town. It was about a 7-minute bike ride away from my home to the bus stop. It was still dark because it was pretty early in the morning. When I left my parents' home on my bike, I noticed a light behind me. It was that same car. I don't know how he knew this was my route. Maybe it was pure bad luck on my part, but I'm 100% sure it was him. He followed me until I took a detour down a path which a car couldn't use. Only bikes and pedestrians could take it. I turned off all my bike lights and rode until I got to my bus stop in the complete darkness in order to not be seen and followed by the man further. I kept doing it this way for the next 2 years, and I never met that man again. I always remember the ride to my grandma's house when I was younger. We lived in a different state than she did, and the majority of the ride would be us driving on the interstate. When we got closer to the area that she lived in, we would get off onto the local roads. I always knew that we were almost to Grandma's house when we began going down the dirt road that led to it. I would always perk up and look out the windows to see all the sights there were to see on that road. There were lots of big trees that we recognized. There was also an old decaying shed that was right along the road, and sitting a bit back a ways was a really old decaying house out amongst the trees. It must have been abandoned for a very long time before, too, because not only was it in a visibly awful state, but if it had a driveway, It had long since been grown over by grass, bushes, and trees. I always asked my parents and my grandma about the house. However, none of them really knew anything about it. It had been abandoned long before even my grandma had bought the place. They also warned me to not even think about trying to go over there, though. They didn't even care if we hiked around on someone else's property. That wasn't their concern. However, they thought that old and abandoned house was likely to be very dangerous, and that's why they wanted to keep us away from it. Well, you know, children, when you tell them not to do something, that makes them really want to do it. Although for many years we did listen to our parents' advice and did not try to go and explore the old house. There came a time, though, when I was about 12 years old, and I was the only kid who was at my grandma's house. I was pretty bored that none of my cousins were there, and I really hated listening to all the adults talking back then. So I told my parents I was going to go for a walk. It was a really lovely fall day, and those were the days I liked the most. Basically, all my mom told me to do was wear a jacket, and I did so. It was pretty cold outside, and the leaves were heavily falling from the trees. It was sort of desolate as well, since it wasn't an area in which many people lived, and thus there weren't people or cars on the road. It was a simple and peaceful fall walk. Now, I hadn't set out with any intention of going to check out that old house. It was just by chance that I chose to walk in that direction up the road, and not the other one. After walking for a while, though, the house came into view, and I began to consider going and checking it out. I began making my way through all the trees to get to the house. I was a little bit nervous about someone driving by and seeing me. The last thing I wanted to do was get into trouble. If one of my aunts or uncles were driving to my grandma's house and saw me, it would have been a whole lot of fuss when my parents found out. I managed to get to the house without anyone catching me, though. I nervously walked around the building. I considered stepping up on the porch, but it honestly looked like it might collapse if I tried to do that. I decided I would walk around to the back and see what was going on the other side. Unsurprisingly, it was even more overgrown back there. However, there were some windows I could look through that didn't involve me having to get onto the porch. I did have to get some weeds and tall grass flattened down, though, in order for me to see through it. When I was finally able to get a good look into the window, I was not too surprised with how it looked inside. It seemed like I was looking into a bedroom. There was a metal frame for an old bed inside. It looked like there was a dresser as well. I was immediately curious as to what might be in it. I moved to where there was a back door to the old house. I was wondering if I would be able to get in through it. However, even though it was so old and decrepit, it was locked up tight and the door refused to budge. There was a small window in the door, so I was able to see into the kitchen of the house. There was a table and some appliances in there that were very, very old. As I continued looking, though, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. I could have sworn I'd just seen something moving in one of the hallways. I shook my head in bewilderment, but even at 12 years old, I knew your eyes could play tricks on you. I didn't take it too seriously, and decided to get a better look through another window. I also reconsidered trying out the front porch to see if I was able to get into the house through that door. I had already forgotten the movement I thought I'd seen. I began walking toward one of the other windows, wanting to get a look into another one of the rooms. As I pulled up to it, though, I almost fell over when I saw myself staring right into the eyes of one of the oldest and gnarliest looking people I'd ever seen before. The shock sent me back so far, I fell on my butt amongst the bushes. My hands landed on some thorny vines, and it cut me pretty bad. Suddenly, the back door opened. The really old and filthy man burst out of the house. His appearance was scary enough, but he was carrying a hatchet in his right hand as well. He appeared to be trying to talk to me, but I could only make out a few words of what he was uttering. "You stupid. Trying to break into my house? I'll cut you up good, boy." He lifted his hatchet up as though to strike. Fortunately for me, however, he was a very old man, and although scary, he could not move very fast. I was able to get up off the ground faster than he could reach me. It hurt badly getting up because I had the thorns stuck in my hands, but I didn't pay much attention to the pain. The man was close to me, and if I didn't book it as quickly as possible, I knew he was going to mess me up. I got up and ran away from him through the woods. My goal, however, was to try and get back to the dirt road. It would be easiest to run back to my grandma's house that way. Other than for a few moments, though, it didn't seem like the old man had the stamina to chase me. I was able to slow down once I got back to the road. Looking back at that house, I didn't see any sign of him at all. I was still scared about what happened enough to hurry my way back to Grandma's house, though. I didn't tell anyone what happened until years later. I was able to explain the cuts and stuff from just falling during a simple hike. However, I was more scared of the possible punishment I would get for being on that property. Years later, when I was an adult and finally told the story, no one really believed me. That was okay, I suppose, but the story absolutely happened, and I'll never forget the way that old man looked when he came after me. One of the worst things to ever happen to me happened a very long time ago, but I've always remembered it very clearly. I'll get this out of the way in the beginning. Not only did it happen out in the hills, it happened before everyone had a phone on them all the time, so I was not able to call for help when I needed it. One of my favorite things to do was drive over to my uncle's cabin out in the country and have a nice evening with him on Saturday. A lot of times, those visits would go really late into the night though, and then I would have to drive home through the dark country roads. I couldn't sleep in anyone's bed but my own, so I couldn't bring myself to spend the night over at his place. My uncle lived so far out in the hills that it took a good amount of time getting back to the main roads too. The night this happened was one of those nights. We had been up all night having some beers and stuff. Much more unthinkable now than it was back then, of course. We had been laughing and having a great time the entire way. The hour was getting late though, and everyone else was already heading off to bed. Even though I felt pretty tired myself, I decided to go out for a nighttime drive home. Yeah, as I mentioned above, I was probably somewhat impaired, which made driving during the night like that even more dangerous than it actually was. You have to realize just how absolutely dark it was outside. There were no lights along the dirt roads up in those hills. Plus, there were so many trees that even when the moon was out at night, it really didn't make much of a difference at all. The only light source at all came from the headlights of the small pickup truck I was driving, and it was so concentrated in front of me that it was hard to see from the sides at all. The roads were pretty dangerous as well. Extremely narrow, and didn't have enough room for cars going in opposite directions. No guardrails either. So there I was driving down that road, trying to drive as carefully as possible and slowly as I could do without running into any problems. I was putting all my focus into driving and making my way safely out of these hills so I could get some sleep. There were so many twists and turns in the road. All it would take was one deer to jump out in front of me in order to cause a really bad accident. I was paying attention, but I wasn't too worried about anything actually happening. At that time, I had never been in an accident before. I was sort of lost in my own thoughts when I rounded a corner on the hill. Once I did, two big redneck boys suddenly jumped out in front of my truck. I came upon them so suddenly that I couldn't control my reaction when I saw them. My hands on the steering wheel immediately swerved to the right to avoid hitting the two men, and when they did so, that caused my car to fly right off the road and off the side of the hill. I would love to tell you about what was happening at that point, but I seriously can't even recall what happened. I do know that I swerved after that, but I can't remember anything else. I can put together a rough image of what happened in my head though. I mean, obviously I swerved off the side of the road and the hill. My truck likely turned over several times when it was flopping down it, and when that happened, it knocked me out pretty good. Everything after is sort of a blur. Several times I came in and out of consciousness. I thought I heard and saw both of those redneck boys more than once. Knowing afterward how far my truck had fallen down that hill, they must have made a significant effort to try and get down there to where I was. I kept hearing them talking, but I wasn't able to make sense of what they were saying. At times, it seemed they were discussing whether or not they thought I was dead. I wanted to say something to let them know I wasn't, but I didn't seem to know how to do that in the moment. There was some talk as well about possibly burning my truck so there wouldn't be any evidence of what happened. That terrified me, but I couldn't do anything about it. I couldn't move or do anything to get their attention. I knew they opened the cab of the truck at some point. I found out later they had taken my wallet as well, since it's never been found. All I can figure is they must have figured out I was still alive, and that must have convinced them against burning my truck or anything like that. They also didn't do anything to help me though, which I know for a fact. I recall quite clearly waking up in the hospital the next morning. The reason I was brought there was because my uncle had stumbled across me in the morning many hours after I'd crashed. There had been no calls to the police or for an ambulance before that. I asked my uncle if the two men I had seen seemed familiar to him, but he had no idea who they might have been. As far as I know, he never found out either. Although I doubt they deliberately were in the way and caused the accident on purpose, they didn't do anything to help, and could have conceivably hurt or even killed me if they had burned my truck. This happened to me when I was only 14 years old. It was after my parents had begun working at home and were able to move out to the country. They had always said they had planned on moving out there if they could afford to do so. They had both been raised in rural areas, but had gone to college and stayed in the city after they graduated. Once they were able to afford it, there had always been plans to move out to the country though. I was an only child, so I didn't have brothers or sisters to keep me company. My parents also chose to move at the end of the school year, so I could finish up at school that year before moving. I'm happy the way they did it, but it also kept me from being able to make new friends at school before the summer break. It was also such an extremely rural area that there wasn't much of an opportunity to make friends anyway. A lot of that summer was just spent with me doing my own thing due to this. It was the first time in my life I didn't have any friends, so it was rather difficult for me to handle. It had also not been too long after I started getting more interested in girls. It didn't help that I would have so many thoughts about them but with no contact at all. I would often have these big romantic fantasies. I would go for walks after my parents went to sleep just to think. It was a way to lose myself in my thoughts, which was one of my favorite things at that time. The night that this story happened, I was on one of my regular late-night walks. I can't tell you exactly how long I had been out walking, lost deep in my thoughts, when I began to hear a strange noise outside. It was really hard to make out what exactly the noise was, but I could swear I could hear it coming from different areas. I wasn't scared in the moment, however. I was intrigued by whatever this strange noise could have been. As I kept walking and hearing these things, though, I started to piece together what was actually going on. I hadn't been out in the country very long, and wasn't used to the weird sounds that were out there at night yet. I knew this too, so I continued doing my thing and walking along. All of a sudden, though, I heard a weird shrieking noise. Of course, as I heard this, I turned around instantly to look in that direction, and when I did, I saw the scariest thing I had ever seen in my life. There was a large, shadowy figure standing in the woods. That would have been frightening enough, but it almost looked like it had glowing red eyes as well. It seemed whatever this was looking right at me. I would like to think in retrospect I would have turned and run away, but I thought I was seeing something that not many people would ever see, and I wanted to take it all in even though I was terrified. A few seconds after I'd seen it, it seemed the red eyes disappeared, and then suddenly I could no longer see the shadowy figure either. It was at that point the fear finally hit me, and I turned and ran away, wanting to get back home after that weird experience. Throughout my life, I've experienced many unusual and often unpleasant situations. For privacy reasons, I don't want to give away too much information about myself, but I will say I'm a 21-year-old girl now living in Ireland, where I've lived over 5 years. I grew up in a small Eastern European country, of which about 40% are Russian, and I'm of Russian descent as well. Even though almost everyone in my country spoke fluent Russian and much of the population had Russian relatives, ethnic tensions within this country were very high. It was not uncommon for you to receive a lower salary or worse treatment in shops and other public places if the place was run by natives. It's because of this I believe I was singled out as a target in this particular story. That and my feeble appearance as well, as I've always been quite short and skinny. My neighborhood, like any other in the area, consisted of many blocks of Soviet apartments, remnants of the USSR, rotting away but nevertheless housing hundreds of people. It was a good enough neighborhood, all things considered, and I would not have called my family particularly poor. The building we lived in, though, was rather bleak. The hallway was always dark and stank of piss or other bodily excretions. The building was quite tall and had this old creaky elevator, which smelled no better than the hallway itself, and often scared you into thinking it was about to break. This, however, was still more favorable than climbing the even darker sets of stairs, which often had people sleeping in them or groups of teenagers gathering to do drugs. The layout of the place is unimportant, but I believe the description of the shadiness will set the scene. After a year or two of living in this building with little occurrences aside from stumbling upon the occasional stoner with a knife trying to rob me for drug money, or a drunk passed out in front of my apartment, I started to notice these two native kids hanging around the neighborhood, a girl and a boy. At first, they never really spoke to me, and I paid little mind to them either. I would often notice as time went on them staring at me whenever I passed by, or gazing out from a distance as I played with the other neighborhood kids. These kids seemed weird to say the least. They spoke a limited amount of Russian and pretty much never interacted with anyone else. They would always just stand there watching me. Despite them being very similar looking, nobody knew if they were related or just two weirdos living in the building who'd stumbled upon each other. I remember always just assuming they must be brother and sister. After a while of this not-so-casual staring, they began to harass me on my walk home. They'd tease me, push me, just generally attempt to get on my nerves with what little Russian insults they knew. I had a pretty thick skin, so this didn't really bother me too much, though. I would either completely ignore them or fight back with what I thought were rather witty comebacks. These kids were absolutely relentless, though. Over time, I began to wonder why they decided to randomly pick on me so much. I had never said a single word to them before. I'd never played with them in any significant amount. I really didn't know them at all. I decided to settle for the "they must just be a bit weird" explanation. Nevertheless, this was all just teasing, right? Kids just being kids. One day on my walk home, though, the strange duo were on my heels as usual, the boy making some crude comments about my nationality and how I should go home back to Russia. Lots of other unrelated insults as well, while the girl also mocked me. I did my best to ignore their behavior, not feeling in the mood to dignify them with a clever comeback this time. It became increasingly difficult. It seemed in frustration the two had suddenly become much more aggressive than usual. All the other times this would go on, they just give up and leave me alone after a while. But this time, to my surprise, they followed me into my building and into that poorly lit, stinky hallway. Still ignoring them, I pressed the button for the elevator when I felt the boy roughly grab me from behind. I was in shock. The girl joined him, bending my arm at an incredibly uncomfortable position behind my back. "What the hell are you doing?" I screamed at them. They began attempting to drag me into the black staircase, telling me to shut the fuck up. I struggled, of course, not really understanding what had suddenly come into these two. I mean, I knew they were weird, but this was something else. This didn't feel like childhood bullies or kids just being kids. These two had something sinister on their minds. As I struggled against their duo grip, trying to break my way free and towards the elevator that had now arrived, a middle-aged woman walked into the hallway. A look of confusion was on her face as she asked, "Is anyone going up?" I desperately called out that I was, reaching for the elevator, only to hear the guy holding me snarl, "You're not going anywhere." To my surprise, despite the pure desperation in my voice and the fact I was fighting two seemingly older kids trying to drag me away, the woman didn't do anything. She didn't even ask what was going on, just shrugged her shoulders and walked into the elevator and closed the doors. What was going through her mind still makes me curious. I assume this was probably due to assuming this was nothing serious because of our age. Perhaps her not wanting to get involved any more than she already had in order to avoid trouble. After all, our neighborhood was not the safest. Best to stay out of things whenever you can. Luckily, her leaving became a surge of adrenaline, partially from my desire to get into that elevator and away from these two, and partially from anger at her refusing to do anything. It's amazing what the human body can do when faced with a dangerous situation. Using all of my strength, I whipped around and slammed the boy into the wall behind me, immediately making both of them let go of me. I could tell the two of them were as shocked as I was at what I had just done. As I said, I was a fairly small girl, but it felt as though someone else had possessed me in that moment. All I knew is I had to get away from this dark area. As soon as I was let go, I ran to the elevator and managed to get the doors open again and inside. The last thing I remember seeing is the doors slamming shut before we took off, the girl's shocked expression as she stared at me. The lady in the elevator didn't say a word to me, didn't even look at me. I wish I could say it ended there. A few days later, I was confident in my ability now to defend myself against those two, and was pretty sure they would not attempt to attack me again, or even go near me. That relief, however, was fairly short-lived. A friend of mine knocked on my door at the usual time I would go out on a free day, asking me to hang out. I, of course, excitedly agreed, and as soon as I was ready, we headed out and to the elevator. As mentioned previously, the elevator itself was not all that sturdy and would easily break down. That's not the only thing that made it extremely unsafe, though. If you were a child and were taking the elevator alone, especially in a building as tall as ours where there were many, many floors, you never knew what the person who got on with you turned out to be, or what they could do to you, especially if the elevator suddenly got stuck. This wasn't something that happened often enough to prevent us from using it and instead take those dreaded stairs. We got on without a worry in the world and pressed the button for the ground floor. We began chatting about nothing in particular. About 4 floors down, though, the elevator stopped, letting on a burly middle-aged man. Just the sight of him was intimidating. He had this sunken-in face and long black greasy hair, sweat stains under his arms. His belly was so fat it took up most of the room in that tiny elevator, pushing my friend and I into a corner. We just kinda fell silent. At first, the man said nothing, just stared at the two of us as the elevator door slowly closed. I could tell that much like myself, my friend had an uneasy feeling about this man. In a deep, hoarse voice, he leaned in and said slowly and calmly, "Oh, you think you're so tough, don't you?" It was more of a statement than a question. I could tell it was directed at me. He pressed the elevator stop button, screeching it to a halt. He reached out and grabbed me by the fringe. He pinned me against the wall of the elevator, still holding on and beginning to pull me up. I could feel some strands of my hair ripping out of my skull as I was being lifted. However, not enough for my feet to lose contact with the ground. I squealed in pain, and my friend watched in shock, cowering into the corner, unable to do anything. "Well, I can be tough too." I began to try and make him let go of my hair to no avail. The more I moved, the more my fringe ripped out, and the more painful it became. Eventually, I stopped struggling and attempted to stand up on my tippy toes as much as I could. "You think it's funny to hurt my son, huh?" For a second, I had no idea what he was on about, but then I realized. The boy I had slammed against the wall in an attempt to get away. He must have told his parents what happened, most likely neglecting to include the fact he had attacked me first. Or maybe he had and his father just didn't give a shit. He seemed like a piece of crap himself.
I know what floor you live on. If you ever touch my son again, I'll bring a knife through your throat in this fucking elevator. You understand me?
Before I could respond, it began to move again. Someone must have called it onto another floor. He narrowed his eyes at me and let go of my hair, standing back and acting as if nothing had happened. We stopped and another person got on a few floors down. The rest of the ride was spent in silence. I don't know what was scarier, the fact this clearly insane man was threatening my life, and the fact his equally loopy son stalked me without my knowledge to find out what floor I lived on and what my routine was, just to get his psycho dad to threaten me.
It's taken me a long time to tell this story. I'm 27 years old now, but this happened to me when I was 14. My name is Adam, and I have one older brother named Seth. I haven't seen Seth in about 13 years. I have no idea where he is, or even if he's still alive, but I do know why he left in the first place. Seth was 2 years older than me, and we were very close. Although all brothers tend to get into scuffles with one another, Seth and I's were few and far between for the most part. He and I did everything together. He taught me how to fish, how to play football and baseball with him, and his older friends as well. Although Seth was bigger and stronger than I was, he always sold me to other people like I was superior to him. He always told everyone I was way smarter than him, that I was extremely talented and I was going to be so much more successful than anyone could dream of. I really loved him. He was easily the best friend I'd ever had. Around the time I turned 14, however, Seth began acting very odd. At first, I don't really think my parents thought much about it. He was wearing black all the time and seemed really depressed. Rather than hanging out with me or even his friends, he took to spending an awful lot of time alone in his bedroom. He kept all his lights off all the time too, because I could never see any light coming from underneath his door. That might seem like typical 16-year-old boy sort of stuff, and that's likely why my parents didn't pay it much mind. I was much closer to him than they were though, and I knew him better than anyone else. I knew that this was not typical teenage stuff. Hell, I was a teenager at the time too. I was going through a lot of that stuff myself, but with Seth I could tell it was something more. I would walk by his room at night, and I would hear him talking to someone. I never heard another voice though. I chalked it up to the fact that he must have been talking on his cell phone, but the conversations were never pleasant. Whoever he was talking to, Seth was always at extreme odds with that person. Whatever it was that was bothering my brother, he never told me. He also never got angry with me either. He would always say hello if I greeted him and offered a friendly, if not extremely worn-out smile. But rather than do anything else or say anything else to me, Seth would immediately go back into his room and lock himself up in there. I wouldn't see him again for the rest of the day. After a couple of months of this strange behavior and no signs of it stopping, I was sitting at my computer doing some homework. I was having a difficult time, and I decided to take a break and chat with some friends on Yahoo Messenger. This was a long time before the days when Skype and Facebook were the norm. All of a sudden, I got a message from an unknown user. I don't feel comfortable sharing the real name, so I'll just call it Yahoo Stranger. This person sent me a message telling me if I didn't keep very far away from Seth from now on, they were going to kill me. At first, I was too alarmed to say anything, but after I composed myself, I messaged the person back and told him that Seth was both my brother and my best friend. I would hang out with him whenever I wanted. The person didn't respond. I kept sending him messages asking who he was, but he only responded that I'd been warned. I wanted to confront Seth about this, but he refused to talk about anything when I mentioned the message to him. There was a little bit of recognition in his eyes, but he forced a weary smile, tousled my hair, and told me there was nothing to worry about.
He would take care of everything himself. And that was the very last time I ever saw my brother. The following day, he didn't come out of his room to go to school. I went up and knocked on his door at my mom's request, but he didn't answer. My parents tried to coax him out of his room as well, but we found that the door was locked. He didn't answer. My parents eventually had to pick the lock on the door. When we went inside, Seth wasn't there. What's more, many of his things were gone too. There was a note on his bed that simply said goodbye. My parents, of course, called the police and went through the whole missing child procedure. It wasn't until I curiously turned on the monitor to Seth's computer that I got a little bit of information about what was really going on. The very first thing I noticed was that Seth's Yahoo Messenger was up and there was an open conversation. The conversation was between me and that Yahoo stranger. It was him that had sent me that message. Seth had also left a cell phone behind. I suppose this was to keep our parents from being able to track him. I remembered suddenly all those times I thought I'd heard him arguing on the phone with someone. He had no calls in his history though, other than from my parents and me. If he was arguing with anyone, it was not on the phone. The true scariness, though, came from the fact that we found a long and detailed conversation on the Yahoo Messenger. It was between the Yahoo stranger and the screen name we knew to be Seth's. The conversation was horrid. The Yahoo stranger was telling Seth over and over again to kill me, grisly, disgusting things the messenger was telling him to do to me. The responses were adamant that he loved me and he would never hurt me. There was a message that night, though. The one after I told Seth about what happened. That was the scariest one I found. The stranger account, who I now assumed was also Seth, had adamantly told Seth to kill me that very night. Seth refused and argued with him and pleaded with the Yahoo stranger to leave him alone. I could tell from the messages that the conversation was causing my brother a lot of pain. I was trying to figure out how he could possibly be having an instant messenger conversation with himself. Then I looked at the timestamps of the messages. Each one was at least 5 minutes apart. He had the password saved for both of his accounts, so I figured he was signing out and on to both names, repeatedly answering his own messages. I don't know if Seth was schizophrenic or if he had dissociative identity disorder, or if the Yahoo stranger one was really a different person. What I'm sure of, though, is that the constant threats against me were weighing heavily on my brother for all those months. I have no doubt that the reason he left in the end was that he was afraid he was actually going to hurt me. I keep hoping he'll come back one day. He's my brother and I love him. I could never be scared of him. But I don't know if that's ever going to happen. I was sort of a third party to this story. I didn't get the full experience myself. However, the parts I was privy to were frightening enough. When I was 16 years old, I had an older brother named David, who was 18. I was very much a homebody. But David was the type who always had to be out and about doing something. He was very rarely home, and he also had this tendency to go through groups of friends pretty quickly. Every couple of months, he would be hanging out with someone entirely new. I didn't really care for most of David's friends, but there was one guy I did find really interesting. He wasn't at all like most of the people my brother hung out with. He mostly hung out with a rich and popular crowd. They would always be people who spent all their time cruising around in their father's car and things like that. But he began hanging out with this guy named Will. He was a lot like me, actually. He was one of those pale guys who dressed all in black. Not exactly goth. He didn't wear makeup or any of the other things like that. He just sort of liked the dark aesthetic. I always found him interesting to talk to. Also, whenever they were at my house, and if my brother was in the bathroom taking a shower, which he did 4 times a day for some reason, or on the phone, Will would sit there and talk with me a lot of the time. When I was in the living room watching horror films, he would sit there and talk to me about the death scenes. It was such fun to chat with him. The first time I was a bit put off from Will, though, was when I was sitting and talking to him one night. My brother was showering as usual. He thought that I looked depressed, and asked me if anything was wrong. I told him I wasn't. I was just feeling pretty bad that day. How I could never really get myself and all that. Oh, well, I'll show you something that you can try if you're having a boring day. If you need some excitement, you can do this. Will told me that while he was sitting there. He rolled up the sleeve of his black button-down shirt, where he had all sorts of scars on his arm. They were all in strange patterns. He then took a pocket knife out of his pocket, flipped it open, and began cutting himself open right in front of me with the tip of the knife. I cringed as he did so, and he kept wiping blood off all over the place. He was sort of half wincing and half smiling as he did this. When he showed me the design he'd made, I couldn't even tell you what it was. His arm was so coated in blood. Even then, it was probably just something he'd made up as he went along. I watched as Will then took some bandages out and pressed and taped them on the wound. He looked at me and smiled when he saw the questioning look on his face. Oh, I keep this stuff with me at all times. Sometimes, I just have to do it. Now, you may think this may have put me off from liking Will, but it really didn't. I didn't even begin cutting myself either. I never wanted to. Other than that one incident, he seemed like a pretty nice guy. He was very different than the other types of guys I knew around that time as well. Around 5 nights later, though, around midnight, my brother drove up the driveway and rushed into the house. My parents on the weekend have a job putting up these direction signs that show people where to go to see new subdivision housing. They were gone all night doing that work. David looked scared and was holding his arm. "Where's the shotgun?" he asked me. Obviously panicked. "Why the hell do you need the shotgun?" I asked. "Because Will and his friends are coming here tonight and they're gonna try to kill me. I'll do it first if I had to." I let my brother know where the shotgun was, on the closet shelf in my mom's room, and unloaded. He ran to grab it. I was very confused, and even more confused when another car pulled up outside. It pulled into the driveway and left its lights on, shining at the house. I got up, not really scared. I didn't exactly believe this was actually happening. I looked out the window, though, to see 3 guys in some sort of weird robes, all holding knives and standing outside the door. I recognized one of them as Will. His face was bleeding from obvious fresh cuts, like the ones he'd made in his arm back then. The look on his face was not a smile or a frown. It was just plain evil. For the first time, I was scared of him. My brother came out with the shotgun. He opened the door and pointed it at the first of the 3 guys who were walking toward him. They obviously saw the shotgun in his hands. I'd had enough of all of this and went to call 911. While I was in the other room, I heard a gunshot ring out. Shortly after, I heard a car door slam, and the car left in a hurry. I hung up the phone and walked back to the living room. My brother lay against the closed door, holding the gun for all he was worth. I asked him what the hell was going on. All he told me was that Will and his friends were into some weird cultish stuff, and they threatened to kill him that night. He refused to tell me much of anything else. That was back in 1992. I can't exactly tell you what happened with the police, because I really don't remember. What I do remember, though, is that I never saw Will again, and I'm pretty happy about that. My fraternal twin brother and I shared a room. I think both of us would have preferred to have our own room, but our dad used the extra room as a study. He was a lawyer and he needed it as his office at home. I suppose so, anyway. I slept on the top bunk and my brother slept on the bottom bunk. The worst thing about sleeping on the top bunk is that I tend to have to get up several times a night to go to the bathroom. I guess I must have a small bladder or something. I also drink a lot of pop, though, which probably has a lot more to do with it than besides the bladder thing. It might also have to do with the fact that my brother tosses and turns all night long, and it wakes me up over and over again. This happened one night when I was 15. When I went to bed, I noticed that my brother had already been sleeping. I intended to stay up and read in bed for a while, but I couldn't turn my light on if my brother was already asleep. Instead, I took my Android to the top bunk with me and decided to play some games on my Nintendo app. I played an old Dragon Warrior game with the sound off. Right on cue, no less than an hour later after I got into bed, my bladder started screaming at me that I had to get up now. Trying to be as quiet as I possibly could, I put my phone down and got up. I went to the bathroom, did my thing, and came back into the room. When I opened the door, the light shone into my room for a split second. It must have bugged my brother a bit, because he grumbled something and flopped over, then was quiet again. I quietly apologized to him, but he didn't reply. I tried my best not to wake my brother up again as I climbed up the ladder back to the top bunk. When I got up there, my cell phone light was blinking gray. That indicated someone had just sent me a text message. I checked my phone, wondering who would be sending me a text at this time of night. When I tapped the screen, though, my blood froze in my veins. I read the text from my brother. It simply said, "Hey bro, I'm gonna be out late with my girlfriend. Can you cover for me?" At first, I thought it was a joke. After all, he could have sent the text to me from the lower bunk when I was using the bathroom. It was the sort of thing he might have done. I slowly texted him back. I thought that if he responded to me, I would be able to see the reflection of the light on the wall. I asked him if he was joking. Immediately, he texted me back and said, "No, why would you ask that?" I didn't see any light either. I answered and said I'd just seen him sleeping in the bunk below me and that I didn't find this funny at all. The text back was almost immediate. He told me that it was definitely not him in the lower bunk, and if I was not joking, I had better get out of that room right now. Scared half to death, I grabbed my phone, jumped off the ladder and off the bed, and ran for the door. Despite my better nature, I opened the door. I had to look to see who was actually sleeping in my bed. Part of me still suspected it was Ian just playing a joke on me. However, when my light shone on the bed now, it was empty. Whoever had been there was no longer there. Confused, I turned the light on. No one was in the bed. I crept over slowly and nervously looked underneath it. No one was there either. I checked in the closet. No one was there. I guess the fact that there was no one around should have made me not as scared. It only made things much scarier, though. I ran out the door and to my parents and explained what just happened. I hated to throw my brother under the bus like that, but if there was an intruder in the house, that was way more important. My parents and I searched the entire place, but we didn't find anyone or anything. I wasn't able to go back to bed until my brother Ian got home. It was way too creepy. I never knew what I saw in the bottom bunk that night. All I know is there was definitely someone there. Fishing with my brothers growing up was my favorite thing in the world. Going fishing with my two older brothers, we lived in a very rural area and would often hike out into the woods to go to various creeks. We would go fishing, but we never really caught anything big there. It wasn't as much about what we caught, though, as much as it was about spending time with one another. As was stereotypical with fishing, we always got up way early in the morning on fishing day. We would hike out to whatever creek we were going to and watch the sun as it rose in the sky. It would be fully light outside as we got to where we were headed. The scariest thing to ever happen on a fishing trip, of course, happened the first time we had gotten to see a new creek. We had set out that morning, determined to go a little further into the hills than we normally did. We passed by one or two of our regular fishing spots and kept going deeper and deeper into the woods. We found an absolutely amazing new spot. Thickly wooded, but the creek was huge. It was beautiful as well, and even had a fallen tree stretched out over it. After we determined it was sturdy enough, the three of us made our way over to the other side of the creek and set our stuff out to begin to fish. The day wore on, and we weren't really catching anything. The fishing was getting boring after a bit, so we decided to do something we normally didn't do. Like I said, the creek was quite huge, and quite deep too. We decided to put aside the fishing poles for a minute and go swimming in the creek instead. I really don't know how long we'd been swimming, when I noticed our middle brother had stopped doing anything. He had begun staring off into the woods. Our oldest brother asked what was wrong. He mentioned that just out in the woods, there was someone watching us. My first thought was that some pervert was out there watching us swim, but when I followed my brother's finger pointing out towards the woods, those thoughts quickly evaporated. Standing out amongst the trees was a huge man. We could make out some of his features. He was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, which was pretty odd as it was really warm out. He had a baseball cap covering his face, but the most striking feature he had was that he looked to be holding a rifle or a shotgun in his hand. We weren't sure what to do. In going into the woods, we knew that we were trespassing. We never actually knew whose property we were on, but we did know that the places we hiked and fished on didn't belong to us, except over to this point, we had never gotten caught before. Both of us younger boys looked at our older brother for instruction as to what to do. He seemed just as worried as we did, though. He didn't give us any directions. He just kept looking in the direction of the man standing there. My middle brother suggested we try and get over to our stuff, grab it, and leave right away. This was pretty daunting, though, because that was the side of the creek the man was on. We slowly made our way over to our things. However, before we got to the shore, an old hag came running out of the woods shrieking like a freaking banshee. I got startled and fell back into the water, struggling until my middle brother pulled me back up again. The old nasty woman ran over to our things, our poles and our clothes, and started grabbing them up. She was just screaming, "Mine, mine, mine," as she was grabbing all of our things in her arms, dropping a few of them even. She had too much to even hold. "Hey, stop that!" my oldest brother yelled. He began to try and move faster to the shore. My middle brother reached out and put his hand on his shoulder, though, and pointed back to the big guy in the woods. When we moved toward the shore, he began moving closer and held the gun up as he walked. Holy shit, I distinctly remember yelling we were sorry that we'd trespassed on his property. They didn't pay any attention to him, though. "He's not gonna shoot us," my oldest brother said, and began moving toward the old hag to get our things. As he did so, though, the old hag saw him and took out a fillet knife from her pocket. She started waving it at my brother. "I'll cut you," she screamed at him. Her arm was still overflowing with our things. By now, the big hillbilly was by the shore of the creek. He had the shotgun cocked and was pointing it at my oldest brother. My brother stopped in his tracks. It was a tense moment as we stood cold in the water, with this guy pointing his gun in our faces on one hand and the woman pointing a knife at us in the other. Once the woman had gathered up all our things in our hands, the guy told us to get right now. We didn't have to be told twice. All three of us swam to the other side of the creek, got out of the water, and got out of there. It sucked because we had to walk through the woods in nothing but soaked shorts. We didn't even have shoes. The twigs and rocks and leaves hurt our feet, but we were too scared to even consider going back. Fortunately, we did not get chewed out for having lost our stuff. Our dad told us there was some messed up people out in the woods, and we had to be careful. It was a long time, however, before we were brave enough to go out fishing again.